All right, welcome to Cleveland Heights City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. It's July 13th at 5 p.m. Tony Kuda, would you please call the roll? Tony Kuda, here. Gail Larson.
Here.
Kurt Cobb.
Here.
Jim Posh.
Here.
Joe DeWitt-Foley.
Here.
Sarah Stone.
Here.
Jessica.
Here.
Cohen.
Here.
Is Stone rhyme with Cohen? Not really.
Stone. You pronounce Cohen correctly now.
And we have the mayor here, Jim Petras, and our city administrator, Michael Reese. The first item on the agenda, and just for people who are listening, we have deer management, community relations. We have a Parks and Rec update from Director Gonzalez. And then we're going to talk about short-term rentals and housing needs assessment with Sarah Stone, and then planning and development with Councilwoman Cohen. And then I have a 10-minute or less update at the very end. So, deer management, who wants to take that one?
I'd like to. That's okay.
It's all yours.
Part of the Public Safety and Health Committee. And a lot of work has been done sort of in the background with Councilmember Gail Larson. I feel like we're sort of brother and sister trying to work together on all this stuff. We have City Administrator Michael Reese, who's also been part of the cadre of trying to figure out what to do. Although we're trying to come to council with some recommendations and we're fine tuning some things, Michael from the administrative perspective, Gail and I just from the relationships that we've been building with ODNR and the Metro Parks. It seems like some of those are slowly getting passed over to the administration as they take over this. We have Chief Britton coming to some of the meetings that we've been having. But the big thing that has happened within the last week is ODNR has finally given us a draft deer management plan. I have shared that individually with council members, not for discussion purposes. That happens like now, but just as to sort of like some possible pre-reading if you've had a chance to look at it. I'm going to go over some key issues in a second. If this is a public document, if anybody wants it, they can reach out to me. If Addie was here, I'd ask Addie to post it as part of the agenda. I mean, this is pretty hot off the presses. Essentially, just to kind of go over some core kind of facts when it comes to urban deer populations. They unnaturally grow 30% a year. So what starts off as maybe 10 deer end up as 13 deer that end up as 18 deer that ends up, and it's just an unnatural growth. Many urban cities have been dealing with this, especially our neighbors such as South Euclid, Shaker, and Beechwood. They have put together deer management plans. Deer management plan is a nice way to say that you're eliminating or you're cutting your herd. You are not eradicating your deer population, but you're trying to get your deer population to a point where it is sustainable for the community. And sustainable means sustainable for the deer surviving, sustainable for the community to digest having a smaller deer population and what it takes to get there. We have a recommendation from ODNR to call 200 deer this winter. 100 deer next winter and 75 deer the following winter. If we wait on doing any calling for the first year, it essentially means that we are going, if we call 95 deer a year, it basically keeps our population in check. So otherwise, we're growing essentially 95 deer every single year. And the issue is trying to get to a point where we're maintaining a healthy balance for the community to understand that this is a proper amount of deer within our community, and so the deer have enough food for themselves and they can survive. We have to kind of look at our neighbors to see what our neighbors have done, because we're sort of like late to the game. Most of the key neighbors, again, this is South Euclid, Shaker, and Beechwood. And I have to say University Heights right now is looking at building on to be part of this regional effort to maintain our deer. But essentially, it's pretty likely that we are gonna be getting a recommendation to call up to 200 deer within the next year, hopefully this winter. The administration has been thinking through this. I believe they've been talking to some vendors. I know they've been talking to some vendors, the vendors that our neighboring partners use. I mean, Shaker and Beechwood do this absolutely together. I think it's one PO. What we found out that the Shaker plan, they pay about $2,000 a deer, which was a little bit of a surprise to us. When we individually spoke to them, they gave us a number, but we didn't know it was a number that they actually both had to pay together. We thought it was about $1,000, but in reality, they're paying $2,000 because they're basically splitting their invoice in half. We didn't understand how it was happening. The South Euclid option is much more affordable, but it's a little bit different. The Shaker project, the Shaker is very turnkey, where their vendor handles everything. The South Euclid relationship is not as turnkey, but it works really well for South Euclid, and I believe our administration is talking to them a little bit more about that. So what happens with this whole process is with the culling, the deer are actually processed by a butcher, and the end result is meat that goes to food pantries and the food bank. We have a public hearing set for July 28th at 6 o'clock. This is gonna be very similar to the public hearing that we had at the end of April and at the end of April last year in 2025. We have presentations by the Metro Parks. They're gonna start. Essentially, their naturalist is gonna come in and discuss urban deer populations and how they've been exploding and why they've been exploding. And some of it is because our public feeds the deer, which is a real no-no. It just means we're gonna get more deer that we're gonna have to take care of, and the city has been running public information messaging to try to prevent people from feeding deer. So it just compounds the problem. But the presentation is gonna start with Metro Parks. It's science-based, it's very educational. It's something anybody that really wants to dive into this issue really needs to hear and see, and then fact check. Obviously, I think some people are gonna be concerned, and they should fact check all this like I think we have done. The second part of the presentation, the shorter part, is gonna be from ODNR, and they will be talking about the deer management plan that they presented to us. What it takes, why it's important, what the options are, because there are options. And then we're gonna have a public comment section.
I don't know what cost. When you talk about the options.
The cost situation is really handled by the administration at this point. They will be, when they take over, they will be coming back to council with some recommendations based on what they feel like. This really is a decision that really needs to be made with our support, obviously, but they have to be running this program and they have to be comfortable with it. ODNR can't tell them what vendor to use. But I think the way this looks like is shaping out, we have neighboring cities that do this and do it very safely. I think we'd just be tacking on to what they do, using some of their expertise. There will be some ballpark costs that I think will be shared along the lines, but I think it's a little bit too early to figure that out.
So on that note, do the costs then, it really depends on the vendor, is what I'm hearing, just like
Yes.
anything. So it would be through procurement that we would get a sense. And if it's in the winter, timing wise, does that mean that for us it would fall in this budget year? Do they have to start? When is winter start? When does the culling season start?
Yeah, so I'll address
Do
that.
you wanna come to the table, sir, closer to the microphones?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Cohen and members of council. So it really depends on what vendor we go with, but there could be, we will look to, if we proceed with this program, based on all the public hearing input and some additional due diligence, we will look to budget something in the 2027 budget. And depending on what vendor we go with, they may do some culling in early 2027 as well as late 2027. There could be 2 cycles, depending on how we what vendor we go with and how we structure our program. But regardless, we hope to do more than 95 because that's just kind of status quo. So, we haven't officially ruled out sterilization either. That's something that is potentially on the table, but culling will be the focus.
I'll tell you, it's one of the most frequently asked questions when I'm just out and about. When do you guys actually do? Everybody seems to know that we've talked about it and we've had a hearing and so forth, but I hear a lot of.
I know you want to say something, but I just want to make one quick kind of follow up to that. I mean, so we did have this public hearing in 2025, and there has been some disappointment in the community because they didn't see us do anything last year. And I think we need to recognize that the prior mayor, the former mayor, was really ignoring this issue. I mean, and it was something that was not on his radar. He didn't want to touch it. And that's disappointing from a number of reasons. I mean, one of them is now there's more deer that we have to address. And, culling is a nice word for killing. But I mean, we have to kill more deer now because we waited too long. And we can skip a year because maybe we as a council choose not to do this. It's just going to mean that we have more of a more unsustainable situation. And I think this is why it's important that people come to this public hearing and sort of hear from the experts on what gets done and what's the cause of all this. I mean, we grew up in a situation where, deers were cute, they ran around. I mean, their population was not growing the way it's growing today. And that is the major difference. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'd also like to add that the vendors that we're gathering information from, there really isn't that much difference between them in terms of the process and the space they need for processing the carcasses and that sort of thing. I would like to make sure you all understand that our sister cities, Shaker Heights, Beechwood, South Euclid, are very interested in working with us. So we're not in this alone. And any experiences that they've had, South Euclid's been doing this since 2020. They are absolutely willing to share with us and help us through this. And I think that's, to me, reassuring because for their own personal deer counts, they want this to work. So.
And Euclid, by the way, when we had first suburbs, I actually conned them in. I mean, I asked them to have this as a topic. They did take it up. There was probably, 20 cities represented at this meeting, and Euclid was another one that was interested.
Councilwoman Larson, you mentioned South Euclid started in 2020. Do we know when Beechwood and Shaker, how long they've been doing their process?
Maybe a year or two after.
Okay, but around the same
It
time.
wasn't long.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think they've been doing it for 5 years now.
I think that's right.
And most start without sterilization. And sterilization was new to Beechwood and Shaker last year. South Euclid, I believe in 2022.
21,
Well,
the following year.
Well, for the following year, they got the sterile. So South Euclid got a very generous grant, I believe from the county to try sterilization, and it's effective for a very long-term plan. It doesn't really address any short-term issues. It is pretty expensive, and the only people in Ohio that I know that do it from the deer management meetings is South Euclid, Shaker, and Beechwood. It's done on the East Coast a lot, but not so much here in the Midwest.
Is Cleveland involved? I mean, they're contiguous to Cleveland Heights.
Don't know what the city of Cleveland does.
I mean, that would be important.
Well, Metro Park's within the city of Cleveland.
Well, it's done in every single one of the metro parks.
It's something we'll take a look at. We'll do some research on the city of Cleveland.
Councilman Cobb?
Other than voting on this as a budget item, is it anticipated that council will be asked to, vote on a resolution calling for this, or is this strictly going to be then an administrative function?
I don't know the answer to that yet. I talked with the law department today, and I'm gonna be getting some information to them. There may be a need for legislation yet this year, but I don't know yet. Obviously, this is separate from any budget piece, but we'll have answers to that soon.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Just two things. I mean, I just would like to say I really endorse this, having lived in an area that did not have deer culling and an area that was surrounded by areas that did. The deer know where to go, and it's probably exacerbating our problem that we don't have a program. One of the things that I saw in the proposal is the requirement or desire that the city collect more data about the deer related incidents related to traffic. So I would just highlight that to say that that's a missing piece, and I think will be very persuasive to the public. We all suspect, but probably don't know the number of incidents that involve deer and how dangerous they are.
Well, up until this administration, as in last year, the data capture and recording was very sporadic and not very consistent, and it's frustrated the folks from ODNR because those are key measurements. I mean, deer fatalities because of they get hit by a car, dead deer found on private property, sick deer that have to be euthanized. John Barber, in his public statement in the public hearing we had a year ago, basically said we're doing deer calling today, but we're basically doing it with our cars. And that's kind of difficult to comprehend. So I do want to say that the methodology that gets used is very humane. It is very safe. And I think when we get closer to any kind of decision, I think we all need to get a little bit more detailed in that and really understand and analyze the safety for our residents of what's going to go on.
Quick question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that South Euclid's program is slightly less turnkey than what Shaker and Beechwood are doing. What do you mean by that, and how do you see it? If it's an additional burden to the city if we go that direction, or
Well, I think there's a little bit more need to do some coordination. The people that run the Shaker in Beechwood, they're very familiar with the city of Cleveland Heights. USDA, which does South Euclid, isn't as familiar. There's also the issue of when the meat is processed, that actually has to get transported back to the food centers, and a turnkey solution just does it all. Whereas there's some running around that city staff is going to have to do. We didn't talk about costs. I'm uncomfortable talking about the USDA costs, but it is significantly less than the $2,000 a year or $2,000 a year, which is why I think that's very attractive to our administration to walk down that path and see where we're at with it.
We do need to move on to other agenda items. I just want to say, this is an anecdotal thing, but on Saturday I went to a block party in Derbyshire. The 92-year-old woman that started that block party 50 years ago was there, and she said, "Follow me." Up her driveway, she showed me what the deer have done to her. She actually has a gate, to close off, at the top of her driveway. So right outside of there, it's bad. And I think what it made me think about was, obviously we're not going to eradicate deer, but we do need to come up with strategies for people who, like some information about how they can protect their foliage. Because that's still going to be. All right, anything else about this?
I have one thing. The city has put out some more public information requests to get people to take a survey. It's the Urban Drought Survey that ODNR puts together.
Yeah.
Anybody that's listening, whether your gut reaction is you hate this idea, please take the survey. If you like the idea, please take the survey. I mean, we need to get as much information as we possibly can. We need to know what people think. Come prepared to make a public comment on the 28th. If you
At
can't
what
make
time?
it's the 6 o'clock, council chambers, I believe Wednesday the 28th, or is it Tuesday? Tuesday the 28th. Please show up.
Councilman Pasha, are they publicizing the survey on social media?
It was in the newsletter on Friday. I don't know if it's hit social
I saw
media.
it once.
You did, okay. I would just, if we're still collecting,
It's open all year round, open all the time.
So I think they were publicizing the event.
of the event.
Great. Thank you.
Great. Parks and Rec.
We have Director Gonzalez from Parks and Rec to come on up. And I think we're gonna start with the general overview, how the last few months have been going, and then kind of what you see for the, the second half of the year. And if we wanna start previewing, into next year as well, but I'll hand it over to you. I have some questions. I know other people have questions, but we'll start with you and then just go through.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me,
Thanks for
guys. Appreciate it. I have just some things I kind of give you an update on what's kind of going on in Parks and Rec all together. A lot going on, but just go park by park here. I'll start at Denison Park. We'll start with the splash pad. The splash pad is moving along. There was a lot of things that when they originally planned for the splash pad, they didn't do very good planning. Let's just put it that way. So a lot of that fell on my lap, and down to like underground utilities and tying into like Cleveland Water putting meters on things and whatnot. So we're moving along with all that stuff. We have an application into Cleveland Water currently. Once we get that permitted, we'll move on to the next phase, which is hooking up the water line. And we're pretty much done with everything else. Last week we ran all the electrical that was needed, so that's completely done. This week they're working on the rest of the plumbing, which includes backflow preventers and different things like that. That'll be completely done this week. And then we have some walkways that are going to be going in and different things like that. And that'll be completely done. And like I said, it'll just be up to Cleveland Water to get us that permit. And once we get that permit, we'll hook up the water and we'll get that thing operational. So regarding a timeline, I know that's probably what people are gonna ask, like when, I don't have 100% up. Like we were hoping to have it up and operational by the middle of July. That was my original. But we did hit some snags with Cleveland Water and whatnot, but we feel like we're making headway with them as well too. So I don't have 100% an update on timeline, but we're getting there very quickly.
Do you feel like that is moving forward, or do you kind of hit a snag there? That
No, it is. We heard back from Cleveland Water on Friday.
Right.
We had to provide them some additional information. So the good news is that they put us back to the front of the list. We don't have to go all the way back down to the bottom, so we should be able to get something moving very, very quickly over there. Perfect.
It is a concrete slab. And I know there's equipment that needs to be installed, so how long will the installation of the equipment take?
That'll take a day,
Okay.
a day or two, yeah.
Okay.
So-
I would ask because this is so important to that neighborhood, to our neighborhood. If you can continue to give updates now as we're getting closer to the end, because it would be lovely to have an opportunity to use this in August when we're gonna see hot weather again. We'll see it again this week. I'd really ask for something out of the ordinary, and I apologize for asking for staff time, but people have been waiting since 2023.
Okay.
And I know that you got handed some stuff you weren't prepared for, but anticipate that the community is sitting out there waiting for a delightful experience, so.
Yeah, trust me, there's nobody that wants this done more than me, because I'm
Yeah.
getting emails and phone calls about it on a daily basis, and I understand why. But we're trying to push it along as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you.
So my question is about our working relationship with Cleveland Water. We obviously rely on them for a lot of different things, not only our water, but we have road repair and things where they have to come out. So who manages that relationship? And maybe this is a question for the mayor or city administrator Michael, who manages that relationship? Who's the lead on that relationship? And when we hit delays like this, who's responsible for, you know, working through the commissioners on Cleveland Water or elevating issues so that they are responsive to us, even though they have a lot of.
I suspect that individual directors have existing relationships with the organization. I have a relationship with the director, and there have been instances whenever, for example, at the beginning of the year, there was a private property owner whose property was damaged from a Cleveland water project. I was able to work with him directly to try to understand if the city would be able to compensate them. In this case, I spoke with Director Gonzalez about this. We felt that this was not necessary to elevate to that individual, but I think there are multiple people who have a relationship with the organization.
Just building upon that, I know Director Klingscale, because her and I have talked, based on conversations I've had with you, council member, and just other projects where, you know, she has a very good relationship with her peer there, and so she regularly, you know, talks with them when there needs to be coordination and a response based on a constituent issue or something a council member brings to our attention.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just, you know, as we intersect with them at different points, you know, want to make sure that if it's not us, you know, we do. I think we have all received emails asking about the splash pad from residents, and we want to be able to both communicate what the issue is, but also, you know, process-wise, figure out how we can ameliorate that for the future. So appreciate that.
So, just a suggestion, you know, it might be helpful when it's ready to open that there is some big splash. You know, whether there is a PR piece, I mean, something, and really targeted for the community, not necessarily citywide. It could go to the whole city, but you know, this was really designed to make that community feel special. You know, a pool was taken out, they're getting a splash pad. There's some hard feelings about that still. And obviously it's taken so long, and that's not on your back, that it goes back years every time I drive by the old communities or the community center, seeing it sit in crates year after year. You know, we've all been pulling our hair out, and really appreciate the work that you're doing on it. So.
Thank you. Yeah, we've talked about, we've planned to do some type of nice ribbon cutting for the community and whatnot, so we could do something.
You know, Noble Neighbors could be really excited, I would think, about participating in something like that. They're just finishing up their festival or.
And the Noble Neighbors have been great. They're actually donating some benches to the area as well too. Once we get the top playground in as well too, the Noble Neighbors are donating a couple benches in that area.
Great. Just related to the splash pad, like when do the splash pads close at the same date as Cumberland? Like, is all the water on one?
We could typically leave the splash pads open a little bit longer, because they're very little maintenance to them. There's no chemicals that are needed, different things like that, and it's just a simple opening and closing of valves, and then winterizing and then dewinterizing. So they're a lot less maintenance. So we can typically leave them open later if the weather's nicer.
So maybe that's just a consideration for, you know, the weekends, or, you know, to allow, if we have, I mean, who knows, it could be snowing in September, but and then the other thing was on the splash pads, somebody had, I don't know if I received an email or a phone call, but it seems like we leave the water on the splash pads or the Kane Park, like the entire time.
They're on timers.
They are on timers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a button on the side of the building. You push the button, and I'm not sure on the exact timing, but they are on timers.
Okay, so you can, it will turn off and then you
Yeah.
turn back. Okay.
Yeah, when you leave, obviously the water is still on, but it will turn off.
Okay.
Yeah, they're on
Thank you.
timers.
Well, I was gonna ask, I think some systems are motion activated. I mean, maybe when you're in a wooded area, that just doesn't work because you're getting
Yeah, the
motion.
even the new splash pad that we're installing is on a timer. It's hand activated, so you have to hit like a button, and then it'll activate it to be on for, let's just say 30 minutes.
Okay.
And then they'll automatically turn back off, and then you have to go back and hit the button again and whatnot. So in an effort to save water.
Sure.
You mentioned the top lot.
Yep, that was next on my list. Yeah. So the top lot, the top playground, call it, everything has been ordered. It was ordered back in the spring. So we're just waiting, I'm waiting on an update from the company to see when they're gonna get all the playground equipment in. I know that because it's been super nice out, the playground installers have been very, very busy, so we're hoping, you know, in the next month or so, we'll get that installed as well too. But I don't have an exact date on any of that because we're still waiting on the actual play structure to come in from the manufacturer, so. But that'll be a nice addition over there as well too. Go ahead.
Are we still on Dennison?
Sure.
I know that we had to have some police stationed up there. Is that still the case now?
The police are doing patrol, and they're making a presence. It's not as bad as it was at the beginning of the season because I think the police presence has really, really helped. We still, you know, have some problems every once in a blue moon up there, but nothing that we can't handle, nothing that like it was before.
And how is it going with having the turf field open? If we had any incidents or problems with the expanded hours?
At the beginning of the season, yes, we were having problems with a lot of gathering, just not using the field. There was just a lot of gathering up there. We were having issues with kids riding their e-bikes and scooters on the actual field itself. But since then, we've added some signage.
No
and
damage?
No damage. Thankfully, no damage. We have a monitor from Parks and Rec that monitor our open turf times, and then like I said, the police presence have been coming through, so we've been doing a lot better since the beginning of the season.
Thank you.
Any other questions about Dennison before I move on?
didn't understand that.
Am I not speaking English? Move on to Kane Park, the sledding hill. So that was on a hiatus just for a few because we had all of our big events that took place over there. But Febreze is going to be coming back out. What they're going to do is the side of the sledding hill where the steps are. We were having a lot of problems last winter, with the kids coming down the sledding hill and going straight towards the steps, and it got kind of dangerous. We were putting up temporary fencing and different things like that, hay bales to try to protect it. But Febreze coming back out, and they're going to build up that side of the hill so it directs people to go down the hill instead of towards the steps. And that'll be the last piece of the puzzle over there. They'll do that, then they'll repair the sidewalk and curbs and different things like that, and that'll be done. So they're hoping to come back out sometime at the end of July-ish, early August to complete that work. So that'll be completed.
Will there be any trees planted that were to
Yeah,
replace those?
We're working on a landscape. That was one thing that Karen Knittel was working on right before she left. But she left it in good hands with Brooke Siggers. So we're working on a design. And then once that's all designed, then we'll work on implementing that for some trees and different things like that.
Thank you.
The tennis courts, they started today resurfacing the tennis courts at Kane Park. That'll take them a couple weeks to complete, but that did start today, so we're excited about that. 2 weeks ago, we had a public hearing for the skate park, the last public hearing. Very good turnout. We've got about 40 people that showed up to that. It was very nice. So they got all of the feedback that they needed, and now they're in the final phase of creating the construction documents for that. So we're hoping to break ground here very, very soon. Hopefully as early as the beginning of August, if the pieces of the puzzle all kind of line up. And as long as everything does line up, they still said that they can complete the work by the end of November-ish. So we'll have a operational skate park, hopefully, knock on wood, this year. If they fall behind a little bit, then they'll have a little bit of work left to do in the spring of next year, and then they'll be completely done with that as well too. So, and then we are applying for some CDBG dollars for next year to replace the playground, the play structure at Kane Park as well too. So as long as that goes according to plan with CDBG dollars, we'll be able to replace that next year.
Future works.
That's the cover one. Yeah. Yep, that's up next on my list.
Will it have the same footprint that the old one does, the playground?
It'll be similar but different. Like they have two separate structures now, and now they have more convenient ones where they're kind of like one structure where you can go from the swings to the playgrounds. And I what I thought is really cool is I had them design in a zip line. So it'd be kind of cool to have like a little
Wow.
zip line and different things like
That's
that.
gonna-
So
That is the top attraction at the Coventry Peace Park.
the zip
So,
line, yeah.
Yes,
So-
yes.
Yeah, so hopefully if all goes according to plan, like I said, we'll get that at Kane Park, and then I'll move on to Cumberland if you guys are not done.
Question,
Go ahead.
okay, question on Kane Park. The new stairs, heard some complaints about like the way that they're designed, the grass grows in between the concrete.
Mhm.
Like, how are we managing that? I mean, is that just part of the regular landscaping and it is?
Yeah, when they cut, it's difficult because when they cut the grass over there, obviously they can't, they cut the entire park with the right on
Right,
on
right,
mower.
you can't, right.
You can't use it in there, so it either has to be weed whacked by hand or we have to take a physical push mower in there. So fortunately, that's the way that it was designed back then. But yeah, we try to maintain it as much as we can, like I said, either with a weed whacker or a hand mower up there.
Okay, and then perhaps more importantly, when I was at the Kane Park Arts Festival, the lovely people at the front showed me the ramp, or not the ramp, the path from the disabled lot to the path, I guess, that leads in from Lee Road. And I don't know if that's your area or perhaps the city administrator and the mayor, if that's another area, but I wanted to check in because we have heard a little bit about that as well.
We have a holistic ADA program to provide updates across the city. It was something that folks pointed out to me as well, and so look forward to talking with the team about it.
Okay, yeah, and I'm less concerned about like compliance with ADA and more just like if we can get it on the list to get repaved, like the broken part.
But it's still at an elevation that's like too high. The
I
grade
don't
is-
know, right, I mean, I was just concerned about
I think
the
that
material
it
of the
would
concrete.
Unfortunately be a bigger project, so something that I saw in
No, well, I mean, that's
top of
also
the
good to know just on its own that this is a bigger project than just replacing
Right.
the pavement, which I think
Right.
we can communicate to whoever asks us about it, so that's helpful, thank you.
Before you move on, when the contractor comes to address the sloping, can you ask them to make sure that I've noticed that some of the steps or the stonework is loose already?
Okay.
Remember, we noticed that when we were there for Juneteenth.
Yeah, we will address that.
They're shifting in some spots.
We would definitely address that, cause all that's still under warranty and whatnot, so. Cause they're not even completed with the project yet technically, so they'll fix whatever's needs to be
And
fixed.
then someone told me that they had gotten a splinter from the wood rail that was also installed, and I don't know if we were coming back to finish that at all, the Broadwood, what is that, on the south side?
Well, the only thing that we can do is like stain it or seal it,
Okay.
but it needs a full year, like, cause it's treated wood. So it needs a full year to set in the elements before we can treat it or stain it or paint it or whatever we decide to do.
Then is bathroom renovation at King Park?
Yep, but we're meeting regularly about that, so we're still trying to figure out the final details on what that looks like.
Okay, on track for 27 or sorry, for 26?
We should have some type of work done in 26. Yep.
And I'm sorry, one other thing, the retaining walls by the bathrooms that are leaning in, do we have a plan to address that? Or at least, I think we need to put some kind of fencing or safety tape up.
Yeah, we're very aware of that. I'm hoping to address that in the 2027 budget. We tried to figure that out in the bathroom plan at the same time because we have to do some things. But if that doesn't get addressed with like the bathroom situation, then it'll get addressed in the 2027 budget because it's bad.
Are we pretty confident that that wall is not gonna fall over while someone is walking along?
Yeah, we had historical people come out to take a look at that do that masonry work and whatnot. And they were pretty confident that it's not going to collapse, but it's to the point where it's very dangerous.
Okay, so we've talked about the strap, that's not a strap, we talked about retaining walls. Let's talk about something good, the art fest and how the whole park looked over the weekend. It was gorgeous. And I mean, when I was there, I mean, and I ran into you in the booth. You know, we had family in town and it was just a pleasure to walk through. It was just so nice. And everything seemed to be kept well nice. Everything was friendly. I mean, it was just such a wonderful event. It's always a good event, but it just seemed especially wonderful this year. And I don't know, everything was clean, it was nice. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'll just add to that, I saw the staff at the Kensington last night celebrating. And it was really nice. Everybody was happy and, they gave them like that one side, all of themselves, and it was, they were very proud of, themselves. 14,000 people came, they were,
Wow.
yeah, it was nice.
14,000 plus, and I have to give the credit to the King Park staff down there. They did a fantastic job. I mean, they really busted their tails, and it really showed. So they did a good job, and our laborers did great preparing for it before the calm before the storm and all that good stuff. So they did a really good job. So I have to give them the credit. Sure. We are go ahead.
Couple things about I hate to be this guy, but I can't. I just have to do it while it's on my mind. The food trucks, do they have to be in that area? I mean, is there another place for them? Seemed a bit out of the way.
We put them there because of power situation. So the infrastructure for the power is located up there. A lot of there are some independent who bring their own generators and different things like that, food trucks, but a lot of them rely on hardwired power, and that's where the infrastructure is for that type of situation. So.
And I know there's some local businesses that would love to have been part of it. I know that you can only have so many, but I did hear a little bit from some restaurants like that they would have really liked to have been asked.
Understood. But we try to mix it up. I mean, between all of our events, we had food vendors for Juneteenth, for Pride, Arts Fest, all that different stuff. So we try to mix and match as much as we can and give as much love as we possibly can. Move on to Cumberland. So at Cumberland, I just mailed in the application this morning for the NatureWorks grant. It's highly competitive, but we're going to give it our best shot here. We feel like with the resources that we have, we stand a good chance at getting that. And what we're using that for, if we get it, is to replace the playground at Cumberland next year as well too. So it'll be very similar to the King Park one. They're both like the identical structures pretty much. So they both need to be replaced.
How much money is that?
That one's 160 some thousand, somewhere in that ballpark-ish. It was 150,000, and then they just recently increased the grant to 150 some thousand, up to 100. So it doesn't mean that you would qualify for the whole thing, but we're hoping. And
Director, on that note, when do we expect to find out?
in the next couple of months, I don't think that they gave timeline yet of when they're going to release that, but over the next couple of months, I would assume that we'll hear something. And we'll keep everybody apprised as to what we hear. And then throughout all of our parks, we're between this year and next year, we're going to be addressing benches throughout the entire, because all of our benches, doesn't matter what park you go to, they're all very old and outdated. So we're going to be the mayor and finance director Brodzinski. They found some money in this year's budget to replace some of them. And then we'll address some more next year as well too. So that'll be part of capital that you guys will see coming your way as well for 2027.
Picnic tables as well?
That'll be part of 2027.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Are you considering benches that have these shade things on top? Like I've seen in some of the, can't even remember, park descriptions, like, I mean, it doesn't help in the winter, but in the summer in some areas where there's no.
We can explore it. I haven't really given it much thought. Honestly, we were just kind of replacing what the existing with what's kind of there. But I mean, we can explore those options. The pool season at Cumberland is going fantastic. It really is. we're losing very little water, which is fantastic to hear compared to what we were losing last year. Last year, we were just losing a crazy amount of water. This year, we're losing very little, which is good. Because we're halfway through the season now, the memberships are now half off right now. So anybody's watching out there, you want to buy a pool membership, they're now half off currently. So that's going very well. And then regarding, and just a very, very quick update on the update of the pool itself. We have hired an owner's rep, and we have hired an architect, designer. So we have the kickoff coming up very, very soon with the design company. So we're very excited for that moving forward.
It's really, everybody's very positive at the pool about what's coming. I mean, I don't hear any grumbling this year. Last year, there was a lot of grumbling about taking away our pool. This year, everybody's very positive.
Yeah.
One question for you, we've seen some operational changes in terms of adults are being, and perhaps if you could just have whoever's in charge of the pool email me with a response, that adults are being tested to prove they can swim in order to be in the dive tank, and it takes time for a lifeguard has to come over and test these adults. And it seems like it's an extra burden on the lifeguards to have to do that. We don't understand why.
Well, I'll tell you why, because a lot of our saves aren't kids, they're adults.
Interesting.
A lot of the adults just can't swim, just to be honest with you. So we are being very strict on that because we don't want to save lives. We want lives to stay on the deck and in the pool. So that's the main reason why, is that a lot of our saves aren't necessarily kids, they're adults, where we're having to rescue people jumping off the diving boards or creeping too far into the deep end. And a lot of those aren't adults.
Are they doing that when there's no guard over in the dive tank? Do you have any data on that?
I'm not 100% sure.
Thank you, appreciate it.
If I could add one thing to that, we visited a lot of other pools and we ask about their operations. We ask about deep water tests, things like that. And that's very common. Like, it's very, very unusual that someone does not require it. And I personally, from a liability perspective, would want to see us continue to do that.
Thank you.
So my 4-year-old has been enjoying Cumberland Pool very much. The gate, I know, to the toddler baby pool area has been like off and on, but I think it was working last time I was there, but I don't think it's my 4-year-old opened the gate herself. So I guess my question is, like, can we investigate a different type of locking mechanism on that? Like, it is working, but it's not exactly childproof for like the older.
So look at something that's more childproof, you're saying?
Yeah, I think we need a little bit more. And I just want at the lifeguards have been wonderful. A lot of them are the same kids at the high school that do the tiger shark lessons, and they are just the nicest, most polite. I mean, they're really they've been really wonderful. Even when they have to tell you you're doing something wrong, they're very nice. So I just want to compliment the lifeguard crew for the great season so far.
They have been great this year. And something new that we did this year is we actually partnered with the Tiger Sharks this year. Instead of us being our own individual Tiger Sharks doing their thing, we actually partnered with them this year to make one good program. So it's really helped and it's shown.
And the kids know, by the way, all the kids that take Tiger Shark lessons know the lifeguards. And so it's like a friendly face right away at the pool. So it's been great.
Thank you.
So we've missed that over the last couple of years. And I am really glad that you've noticed that. And we've got a lot of family members that hang out at Cumberland, and the relationships that you see with the older kids and the younger kids just seem to get lost over the last couple of years. And it seems like it's all back together again. It seems like it's one happy family. And that is, I mean, there's a very different vibe at Cumberland Pool this year than there was in previous years. And I know you put a lot of like cool furniture there last year and everything like that, but things are rocking this year. I mean, I don't know, maybe it's just a staff situation, but you know, something good is going on.
We were able to hire a lot of real rock solid people this year, which is really helping, and they're making it an enjoyable place again. So thank you for the kind words, and I will definitely pass that on to the staff because they deserve it as well.
Now, the one lifeguard read the part of the Declaration of Independence. Not nice. Really nice kid. And I don't remember his name.
Jalen.
Jaden. Right. Are we close to the end here?
I just have a couple more things
Sure.
and I can fly through these pretty
Yeah,
quickly.
thanks.
Just wanna, Forest Hill Park, we're working on resurfacing in between the fields and all that stuff. If you've been there, it's in really, really bad shape, so that was part of our capital budget for 2026. So we actually put that into the roads program this year. So we're able to work with the same company and move that forward, so that's going on here now. And then we're gonna be replacing the scoreboards here very soon over at Forest Hill. That was part of the 2026 capital as well too. And then at the community center, I just wanted to let everybody know that we're going to be doing a full shutdown of the entire facility, which includes the community center, the senior activity center, and the ice rink from August 3rd to August 9th. We're gonna be doing a real deep cleaning of it, some necessary updated maintenance on it. We're gonna be doing some painting, different things like that, trying to get it up to speed. So it'll be good for us because we're able to do these things with nobody kind of in our way and really rock and roll. So that'll be down from August 3rd to August 9th. And then the ice rink will be down for the whole month of August like we always do. We're usually down in July and August, but I extended July for skaters. They seem to be enjoying that, so we're only gonna do the month of August for some general maintenance as well too, cleaning, repainting the ice, replacing some lights, replacing some windows that are broken, all that good stuff. So we'll be doing that.
Are the basketball players enjoying the new floors?
I'm just gonna mention that the main gym is officially done now too. Last week we got our scoreboards up. So if you guys have not seen the main gym, I would suggest checking it out because it is awesome and everybody is highly enjoying that. So got the new floor, new bleachers, and new scoreboard. So thank you to City Council for approving those capital items. The people are really enjoying it for sure.
Did we budget for this year for either new ellipticals or new treadmills?
We're working on that as well too. Yes.
There's a few
Because
new
there
ones,
is-
but some are old.
There is one elliptical that is particularly popular. Are you aware of
I'm
that?
fully aware of
It's-
it, yes.
And the other one is broken, and it is impossible for one of your council members to get on an elliptical
So this is just for you,
in the
huh?
morning. No, I'm
No,
just
no,
saying, and I.
No, it gets, I know exactly what you're talking about, and the one particular one gets a ton of use because it's very popular, so yes, we
And
are.
I hope that
exploring
we're gonna
options.
order multiple of those, and the other ones that have the legs spread out. We have, 3 or 4 of those. I think we could probably reverse the number, but
Yep. We're
it would be
exploring.
nice to see that equipment in sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we're working on that, trust me.
Any update on the Parks Rec open spaces?
That's the last thing
Okay.
on my agenda actually here, it's the plan is in administration's hands right now for review. So we've already had one meeting about it, we have a few people going through it, just making sure, double checking everything, and then making our final recommendations to the company. And once we make our final recommendations, they'll make those changes and then it'll be final and then they'll present that to city council.
That's the big plan,
The
right?
Parks and Rec
Okay.
Open Space Master Plan, the big master plan, yeah.
So we should make sure that we can get that on an agenda for sometime in the fall for a presentation.
Let me know when you always let me know.
I'll reach out to them, see,
Yeah.
or we'll coordinate and figure out when that should be wrapped up, and then we can invite them to a meeting in the fall.
Sounds good.
Can I just ask a quick question about Turtle Park? What do we call that?
Turtle Park.
Turtle Park, okay. Is that, is the gate okay there? And is that on the list for any sort of updates or where does that sit?
Nothing for this year.
Yeah.
I think that the biggest two that we struggle with, like I said, are King Park Playground and then Cumberland. So we're gonna focus our attention on those two for next year, but if there's anything little that we can do to Turtle Park in the meantime, we'll take a look at that. Like for example, over at Kenilworth Park, we just replaced some decking and different things like that and made it a little nicer. So simple things like that we can do to make it better and operational. We'll take a look at those things.
Beautiful.
So that pretty much concludes my report. We have a lot more going on, but
Is the basketball court open again at Cumberland?
we're working to get that back operational. Yep. Mhm.
Thanks so
Anything
much.
else? All good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Alright, Sarah Stone, you're up, short-term rentals and housing needs assessment.
Right. I just want to begin with just a statement. There's been a lot that's going on, so I thought I would just condense it into something in some more prepared remarks. So, as we return to considering short-term rental legislation, Director Hannah suggested that I might summarize the background of this draft ordinance. I think this is also a useful time to reflect briefly on why this legislation is important now. First, I would like to recognize the history of Ordinance 190-2023 and the work that President Kuda did to create the initial draft ordinance with our law department over 2 years ago. His research and initiative provided a really valuable foundation going forward, so thank you very much. I would also like to thank Mayor Petrus for his support of our current effort, especially facilitating recent contact with Airbnb. This year, municipalities across Northeast Ohio have actively considered short-term rental legislation. Many, including the city of Cleveland, Lakewood, and Westlake, have either initiated it or tightened existing ordinances to promote safety and prevent large-scale parties and other neighborhood issues. Others, such as our neighbors Shaker Heights, Mayfield Heights, and Richmond Heights, have banned short-term rentals entirely. I believe this legislation, begun by council 3 years ago, is a balanced approach to the more than 140 STRs now operating in Cleveland Heights, our only local hotels. It is also responsive to our law enforcement officials' advice and local experience as described to me and to council this spring by Chief Britton. And it protects the rights and safety of all parties involved. For those who use their property to generate additional income through rentals, it provides clear guidelines about their operations and a first-time registration process that gives the city the names of local contacts to respond more quickly to complaints and emergencies and extra protection for guests. For the neighbors of STRs, the legislation provides enforcement for everyday nuisance like parking issues, as well as decisive penalties for violations of community standards by property owners, including the revocation of their local registration permit and fines. This legislation also prohibits the operation of short-term rentals in accessory dwelling units, ADUs, or carriage houses. For Cleveland Heights, the legislation calls for implementation of a 3% transient occupancy tax paid by the guests who enjoy our city. Such a task can help offset costs associated with enforcement of community standards for the rentals operation. I am pleased to report that we are in continued and productive discussions with Airbnb to initiate a collection agreement whereby the proposed tax will be collected by the platform and remitted directly to the city. I just had an email 15 minutes ago. Such an agreement would both ensure and simplify the payment of the tax, a new source of revenue for Cleveland Heights. The updated legislation you have before you this evening responds to council's comments at our May meeting. We will also seek your guidance about a still developing tax section of the ordinance, specifically about tax reporting by property owners. So I'd like to turn it over to Director Hannah for his comment, and then we'll have time for questions and comments about the information that I shared with you individually over the weekend.
So thank you, Councilwoman, and I'm not sure that I actually have a lot of comments other than to ask if there are questions, and among those questions might be like, the question that I might ask is, do the modifications shown in the ordinance that was distributed reflect council's discussion in late May? Director Zamp took the first pass at that. I went back through it as recently as last Friday after listening to the meeting again. It was very exciting. And it seemed like the modifications captured those items that were discussed by council.
Where do we land on notifying neighbors of an STR being established?
That's a requirement that is not yet reflected. That's a fair point.
Yeah, I still would like to see that happen.
Okay.
Just because it's today and maybe people watching don't know. It's my feeling, and I think others, when I was going through the legislation, that when a short-term rental, which are all in some neighborhood or another, crop up, it's good for the neighbors to know. So when they see people coming and going, it's not, they don't suspect there's some kind of foul play going on.
So you're interested in having the neighbors informed when a registration is granted, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, it isn't, they don't get to say whether or not it happens. This is, we don't have a ban.
And I think that's a good way of ensuring that it's at the point that it would be granted or approved rather than at the point that it would be submitted.
And
That would
in
make sense.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Multifamily buildings, we were hoping that the additional units would be informed that
We've
there was
put a
gonna be-
provision in that it would be publicly displayed in the public areas.
With regard to the general notification of an approved registration, what proximity, to use that term, are you thinking?
I didn't really.
What's our proximity for planning commission notifications?
that's-
Because I think, I would like to expand that, but I think consistency in the interim would be.
So actually, as it's written, it's the immediately adjacent properties, which is, we go beyond that normally, we notify. But per the code, it's the
So
properties
that's a
that
handful, yeah.
touch the property essentially.
Well, that's why I want to expand the code.
Would it be acceptable just to have a master list someplace on
I'm
the
sorry to have
website?
what?
Would it be acceptable to have a master list instead of an actual notification? Would that be easier?
That was my thought, post it online. I mean, administratively trying to do a
That's a fair point.
notification for every one of
And if
these.
people see traffic or comings and goings at a property, they can check out the website to see if it's a property for which a registration's been.
I would just like to enter Airbnb's objection to that, because that was a question I asked. If you do that, you put the property at risk of break-ins, stalking.
Okay.
You know, there's a party here, so it actually is a privacy issue from their perspective for the.
And is that true for the notification generally as well?
No, I think just making the addresses public and put it in any public forum. We can have that discussion with them, but they
Okay,
really didn't, if you go to an Airbnb site, you'll notice that you never see the address. It's only communicated when the rental is actually confirmed. So it's a way of protecting the individuals who live there.
which protects the neighbors as well.
Correct.
So from that, there should be no objection to a notification of the neighbors,
Correct.
but no public, here's.
A number of municipalities have used that are taking a different tack and have conditional use.
I could accept that.
So that's the
I
same.
could accept that. Although I like Councilwoman Cohen's maybe a little broader.
So we can come up with a requirement and insert a distribution radius or something along those lines, and then council can, okay.
I could just add one other detail that's Director Hannah has been working on with Director Zampa Brzezinski, and that if we are successful in our conversations with Airbnb and the tax is then remitted directly to the city, we also are working on working in companion with our registration process, a simple tax return for the property owners to file. I mean, would not tax return is more of a report that would allow them to report the tax that they have collected for the city and other information. So all of that we believe can be managed through the housing department in the Citizen Serve program, and kind of kept as a customer profile for the owners. So it will keep the workload down, I think, on the city. Other questions?
I have a little bit more detailed questions on the red line. Is this a good time? Okay, in the two requirement, so we have the registration requirement, there's two sections, which thank you for switching the nomenclature on that. The first section, it says in 769.03, it has all operators must register their short-term rentals. But in the following section, 769.04, it says all short-term rentals shall be registered by the owner. My preference would be the owner, but I think no matter which direction we go, that has to be consistent. Yeah, well, we're on the same wavelength here. And again, my preference would be the owner unless there's a strong
I
objection
think
to
that's
that.
where that came from in
Yes,
769.
because I edited it there.
But that seems sensible. It's easy.
And then, yeah, I mean, none of this is we had a parking provision in here with the registration requirements in the old draft that short-term rental should be required to comply with existing on and off-street parking requirements. Did that disappear or did that get moved to somewhere that I can't find it quickly?
769.08,
Oh,
section A, it references it, but I don't think it's defined anywhere. And I think that's true for 2 as well. So occupancy by a number of short-term rental users exceeding the maximum number, and 3, exceeding the maximum number of parking, but then that's not defined anywhere that I've found.
so I guess the policy question is that acknowledgement was originally part of the list of requirements in the registration. If I don't know if I have strong opinion, but I'm pointing out that
I think it
we've
needs to be
lost that.
somewhere else as well, cause it's listed as,
Oh, it should be it should be a factor in losing, right here, it's a
Right.
penalty for,
but it should also be somewhere else to define it.
what are you mean parking plan or, it does have in the code in what,
It's in 04.
it does say you have to be aware of it, but there's no specific acknowledgement requirement, I think, got taken out.
No,
Well,
there
it's
is
an acknowledgement that the short-term rental is required to comply with all existing on and off-street
Right,
parking
so it's-
requirements, not blocking driveways, parking overnight on street, and not intruding into the sidewalk.
Where? Oh, I see, okay, fine. I see an 8, okay, great. And then can you just, one question I had around the renewal, can you just walk us through like what that looks like? Cause I think there was like a requirement you only have to share what's changed, but the registration's gonna be valid for 1 year. And then what are we saying has to happen at the end of 1 year?
So approximately 3 months before the end of the year, every short-term rental operator owner will get a notice saying it's time to renew. And then it'll say if nothing's changed, on this form, say nothing's changed,
Okay,
pay your fee and away you go. If something's changed, tell us what's changed. So that can be evaluated in the renewal.
And there's actually no fee either, so.
I was gonna say there's no fee anymore, right? Cause we took that out. Okay, that's what I mean, because I think that's a reasonable annual requirement. And I guess it just like operationally, are we envisioning like a web form or something that people can certify to, or are we?
We can envision that. Right now, I think we would
Okay.
use Citizen Serve, which is a bit clunky, but it's what we process our stuff through. So you can create forms in that, but I think
Oh,
we're
so
looking at.
it is a form, it's not like they're gonna have to email the city or anything, it'll be like a link to a form that they have to complete.
Yeah, we'll have a
Okay,
renewal form.
okay,
This is also where they would report their income and it would be tied to that annual report their December.
And that requirement that describes the changes is in 06, B. An update of any information that has changed since the initial
Right.
registration submitted or confirmation that conditions are unchanged.
I think that makes sense. And I also I thought that the revocation, the additional condition that you put in there, I thought was very good about not uninvited entry of users upon private property, because I can see that being another reason why people would not be happy about.
We saw that in another community and it seemed good here.
Can you elaborate on that, or define, I read that and didn't understand it, so 500 feet of a short-term rental, what can't happen?
If there are instances in which somebody at the short-term rental, described as a short-term rental user, has they're in somebody's yard, they're in somebody's driveway, congregating, something along those lines.
And parking would be the big.
Right, including parking, right, which is also specified.
Okay, how is that separate from abiding by the existing parking? So are we saying
These are people.
guests cannot, well, including off-site parking of a vehicle?
Oh, yeah, right, correct.
Are we saying additional you can't park on the street.
Well, I think that's captured somewhere else, but this is I think this contemplates unauthorized off-site parking on a private property than 500 feet.
A neighbor
Parking in a neighbor's driveway.
and walking in
Correct.
their yard.
You have more?
No, I was really pleased with how this draft turned out, and I just think the additions are really excellent.
Thank you, you all had great, in the last time we were together. So, yes,
Thank you for this work, everybody that's participated in it. It's come a long way, right? Yeah, very happy. My question about the lady with the 5 bedrooms, and I hope you can just restate the email you sent to me about the section 769.10 B6 states that for single family buildings that are for rent, 1 short-term rental is allowed. And then in 769.10 B8, it states for buildings containing dwellings units used as short-term rentals on or before the effective date of this ordinance, the greater of 1, the number of short-term rentals permitted under subsections B1 and B2 are applicable, or 2, the number of units used as short-term rentals prior to the effective date of the ordinance. And you suggested, Director Zamp, there was something else that could allow this to continue for someone that's in that position where they've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, the way it was described was as a lodging house, boarding house term that we have defined in our code, and that's a conditionally permitted use. And there's a process to go through to get that permitted, as opposed to trying to turn this short-term rental code into a pretzel to try to fit it.
So you would prefer that individual go and speak to the housing and planning department about,
If Adrian and Brooke are here in the room, they're the best
and
people to talk to.
I communicated that to the resident
Yeah.
back last month.
all right,
Okay, but I still don't understand what this business is. Is this currently
It's
used?
a home.
Let me finish the
sorry.
question so we know what it is, cause I haven't said it yet. Is this actually being run as short-term rentals, or are these people all there for more than 30 days?
As described to me, this is an individual who has a 5-bedroom house. She occupies the house and for some time has rented individual bedrooms to unrelated people. They're individual lockable rooms. And the individuals come and go at different times. Some stay more than a month, some stay a few days. So
Okay,
it is much more of a lodging house situation.
varies.
Yeah.
Got it.
thank you.
Well, thank you all. Sorry.
Yeah, a couple questions. So going back to section 76908. So I guess more of a concern about part 1, noise audible beyond the boundary of the property on which the short-term rental is located. Our property lines here abut, the driveways are oftentimes right on the property lines. That to me feels incredibly restrictive. That could mean closing the door and that someone can hear that 10 feet over on another, across the property line. That could be just a conversation at this level in a backyard. You could hear it from another backyard. So that feels, it's certainly more restrictive than our existing noise ordinances. And I have concern with, if someone really wanted to shut this down, they could very easily by any noise whatsoever. So I think we should be cautious there. I was unclear on parts 2 and 3. So I did not see these defined anywhere. Number 2 is occupancy by a number of short-term rental users exceeding the maximum number included in the registration. Do we have rules on that? I know we discussed related to number of bedrooms, but I didn't see that defined anywhere. And then the same thing for part 3, parking.
I thought it was 2 per room.
Well, for 2 and 3, as part of your application and therefore when you receive your registration for, there will be a number assigned for each of those.
Okay, so then that would happen during the registration process.
And then if it's found.
Based on number of rooms or?
Yeah, then it's based on that previous section that describes how many you can have per the type of building that you're applying this for.
Okay, so is it defined in the application section? I didn't see
It's
it.
defined in the yeah, this is in section 10.10. Limitations on the operation. So that's where it breaks down maximum number of short-term rental units permitted by building type.
That's different than number of occupants and number of parking. Or
Yeah.
parking.
I agree with you. I think maybe this fell out in one of our versions.
The intent was to match the two.
Yeah.
That's the point.
I know
Okay.
that Cleveland has a spot, requires that it could be, I think it's 2 occupants per bedroom plus like 3 individuals, if there's some, there's some specified number.
And we discussed that last time, but I
We
just
did
didn't
make it in,
see
thank you
it.
for.
And then on parking as well, I didn't, I mean, our other ordinances are just, overnight parking and you have to park, on the driveway or in a garage. So are we thinking of making something more restrictive than that, or, it's referenced, but it's not defined anywhere?
I think that's a fair point. I think the idea, and I think Dublin may address this in a more restrictive way, but my recollection of our last discussions on this was that it would be the off-street spots made available by the owner to renters that complied with not abutting into the sidewalk or, right.
That feels reasonable.
But would it? Oh, off street, sorry, I was thinking street parking, so, okay.
Yeah, and then for number 2, it's really, we can reword it, but it's that there shouldn't be essentially more units in there than are permitted in your registration.
Right, I'm referring to occupants.
Yeah.
Not,
It does say occupants, so we have to tweak that language.
and then on section 76910, part A, so no dwelling unit that receives affordable housing grants or credits from federal, state, or local governments, or that meets any requirements applicable to the property in which the dwelling unit is located, shall be registered as short-term rental. So does that include things like homestead exemption of property tax, or a credit to the property tax, or other benefits essentially largely to seniors? Would that encompass that? Because that feels overly restrictive to me.
I don't think that it's intended to, but I think it can be potentially made more clear.
Because my understanding is that is a property tax credit at the county level.
Right.
And that's what that says.
Is that a
Well, it says
requirement?
affordable housing grants or affordable housing credits.
That did come up from a resident who was
Right.
looking at this, so that
Right.
may be worthwhile clarifying.
So I don't think that would capture the homestead exemption, but I do think that the section is probably worth looking at to see if it could be made more clear.
Okay, thanks.
I have a couple questions. On the short-term rentals where it's mixed, in other words, 4 units, 2 units short-term rental, 2 long-term leases. Are there any provisions for that are different than, well, first of all, is it provided for? And second of all, what's the difference? I'm sorry, I just didn't know where to look for that.
The difference between.
So the general rules and regulations and that specific instance.
You mean like 7, 6, 9, 10, where it says if you have X units, you can have Y units of short-term rental, is that what you're asking?
No, it's not the number, it's just, are there different regulations about notification, about when people can come and go and so forth. Some of the complaints I've gotten over the years have been specific to that. 4 units, 2 short-term, 2 long-term, suitcases going up and down the steps, 2 a.m, that kind of thing. It's like, hey, we're here. Some of these people have been there for years. The rest of the people are there for days. And it didn't mix well. And I'm wondering if we carved out some regulations that are different or just applicable to that case because it is so different than other short-term rentals. I consider it to be a pretty different situation.
We didn't. And my recollection of that meeting is that there was some discussion at one point about landlords, losing tenants if they abuse, using some of their units as short-term rentals and to the, aggravation of their other tenants. But I thought that the consensus of the council was to sort of not try to make that specific and separate.
That
And
may be.
just my additional recollection is that that was how we got to the numbers of short-term rentals per unit to minimize that. So what we have here was the result of that conversation.
Yeah, but that was kind of more about apartment buildings that,
No, we did like a 2-family can only have, or 2-unit can only have 1 unit as a short-term rental, 4-unit can only have 2 units. So we
yeah,
calibrated it towards.
Could there be some expansion of the noise statute or noise provision that's for single family homes that could somehow give those rental residents some measure of protection? I don't know how that would work, but
it's not a single family home, it's
Yeah.
it's a
It's the non-single family that you're.
that's what I mean, is that the long-term, giving the long-term renters some recourse to, if there's a, large party going on, that they can be complainants. I don't know.
I do have that same recall on what you're saying, it's just that we have talked about it a lot. Did, Councilman Stone, the Westlake, or, do you remember we were talking about that? Did you look that up?
I think
And the
they were
reason I'm
just, sorry, go ahead.
The reason I'm asking is, were you satisfied that was covered in this legislation?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think they had they were actually requiring registration of parties, as I remember. That's a separate add-on that people, we're kind of trying to create the conditions that parties are not happening. And they're just saying, we understand that parties happen, so you have to register them in advance, was my understanding of what they were working on. But
Well, and so that was the ordinance. I thought the ordinance was banning that.
that's what I mean, is
Yeah.
that it was, yeah.
Okay,
So,
I misunderstood. Lastly, with the occupancy permit, I know I can only speak to the last 4 years. I know one of the, when somebody would lose their occupancy permit, the trepidation was that you have to move people out. I mean, you can't. This situation, if somebody loses their occupancy permit, I mean, it seems to me that, there's a lot less to worry about in the sense that people are coming and going anyway. So it is the process for that, I don't know, consolidated in some way.
So in addition to the city's, kind of oversight of this, if there are sufficient complaints to the city on a single property, the city can go to Airbnb and say, this is a problem property, and then they'll remove them from the platform. So they can't advertise their rentals.
So when they lose their occupancy permit, what if they lost it while somebody was actually staying there?
I don't know how would that happen that fast for a short-term rental. I suppose it could.
Well, I'm just saying, whenever they lose it, it's gonna happen at a given time. And I don't know if at that given time somebody will be there or not, but I'm just wondering how that would work.
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either. It's an interesting question. I tend to think that the complaint that might be filed that would lead to that, and of course you've got the staggered first violation, second violation, third violation, would be a report, and then the mayor is to make that determination, and then that decision is appealable. So I would tend to see that playing out between rentals rather than trying to dispossess people of. And I think
I think also
my guidance would generally be not to try to eject people on that basis, as opposed to maybe something else. Just to minimize liability.
That might be different from, say, the police arriving to shut a
Correct.
party down and throwing all the people out that are.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm more thinking about like when there's just code violations, they don't comply, they lose their occupancy permit, that kind of thing.
Are we talking about occupancy permits though, or registration for short term?
Registration.
That's what I.
Right, so there's a distinction. None of this, to my knowledge, even applies to an occupancy permit.
Correct.
You're not allowed to use it as a short-term rental, but you could then live in it or rent it, which is different than losing an occupancy permit. That's my
I agree
understanding.
with that, yes. I understood the reference to occupancy permit to be the registration.
All right.
Think further. Thank you
yeah.
all. We will probably be bringing this legislation back in early September and have set up some public hearings, and hopefully we'll have more to tell you about WB one.
And we'll follow up on those items enumerated tonight and may reach out to some people to run past some of the specifics.
Thank you. Now, Director Zane. Another part of our
Second here,
report.
then we vote. Okay. So I wanted to give you, dedicate a little time here to talking about this very important initiative that we're working on this year, which should really set up decision-making for this year and beyond. I know I only have 15 minutes, and the 15 minutes is already sort of cut down, so this presentation is meant to get posted and shared. There's gonna be a lot of information in it that you're not gonna have time to process today. That's the intention. It's just the start of the conversation, not the end.
Don't feel bad.
Yeah. So what's really important here, and I think we've gotten some of these questions from folks of why are we doing this and what is it and what isn't this study? I want to start quickly with a question I've asked in other contexts, but when did Cleveland Heights reach its peak population? Raise of hands around the table. Who thinks it's the 50s? Who thinks it's the 60s? And who thinks it's the 80s? 80s, okay. And anybody think it's the current decade? Okay. So those who said the 60s would be right. But as we know, our housing stock is old. It was built mostly between the 20s and the 40s. And the number of people in households has decreased. So we have a mismatch. We have housing that was built for nuclear families or larger families, and people who don't really fit that need anymore. So that's part of the purpose here. The city wishes to ensure that it has a comprehensive understanding of the local housing market and is able to respond to any gaps with the appropriate housing policies. So this is a planning document that gets us to policies and strategies and things that we're gonna adopt in the future. What it isn't is an actual market study itself, which is about a project. It's not a report on code enforcement and inspections. I think a lot of people, when they hear housing, they think this is the housing department. It's not about the housing department per se. It's not about a specific project, and it's not about adopting a policy change. It's about all of these things in a larger context. We've got a team, Stantec and Square Loop Planning. Here's the folks that are leading from each of those teams. And here's the scope of work that this project's supposed to follow. And task 2 is the big part of this project, which is data, because we wanted to have data to be able to make these decisions. And so you can see here are the areas that are being reviewed. There's stakeholder and community engagement, which I'll talk about in a second. And then task 4 is that analysis, the gap analysis, housing needs and barriers analysis. And then there's recommendations and report. There's a long list here, but you'll see I've added an asterisk at the bottom, which is, this is where I think council can be really helpful, useful, is take a look at what's going to be included in the recommendations and see if there's anything that you think is missing, things that you think should be prioritized. Now's the time for them to know about those things, that they can start to craft those recommendations.
So is the first bullet point subjective, or is it going to be based on the data that from the slide beforehand?
It's mostly data driven, but you'll see in a second there is some subjectivity that we wanted to factor in. Just in terms of schedule, you can see really 4 parts to this, but 3 main pieces. Research and analysis, that's the bulk of it. That's being wrapped up. July and August are the strategies, and then the document itself is towards the end of the year. I'll come back to the schedule at the very end and ask you a question. Stakeholder engagement, which is not the data part of this, is really important, but it's going to help supplement the data, which I'll get into in a second. And these are the different ways in which community that we're seeking engagement from the community. So on the left, there's a story map. On the right, there's a survey. We had an open house on the 24th. Those QR codes that are part of this presentation link you to each of those websites. There's a technical advisory group which has been really helpful here that's helping to guide this project and its advisory. And you can see we've got about 17 members, and it really tried to capture experts in the community, including residents, that deal in the housing space. CDCs, realtors, the county itself, the school district, MAHO, which is an accessibility and disability organization, the county land bank, developers, the CAC, architects, UCI, which is University Circle, and I think I said the schools twice here. There also were developer interviews, so they spoke to developers and they asked, like what's keeping housing from getting built here or getting improved, and so you can see here are some of their responses to that. This part here I'm going to run through very, very quickly. You're going to see slides that have a lot of information on it. I'm not going to go into any of the information. It's really just there to show you the type of analysis that's being done. But I do encourage you to review this by the next time that we come back and talk about it. So there's really 4 main areas that they're looking at: the economy and growth drivers, demographics, inventory that we have itself, and then a market analysis. And you might ask, why is economy the first thing? Well, it's really interesting to understand why people are living in Cleveland Heights, and that's partially or primarily because of our proximity to University Circle, to the job centers that are in Cleveland. And you can see that there's a small percentage of people who actually live and work in Cleveland Heights, although that number probably is growing by the day. So again, there's probably about 10 other slides that are related to economy, but you can see there's some key observations and housing market impacts here. And I'll just run through them quickly. Instead of being driven by regional growth, demand for Cleveland Heights housing results from household relocation from the urban core or from the more distant suburbs. People want to live in Cleveland Heights because we have that sweet spot of being close to the city with our own cool districts, but not in the city, not in Cleveland itself. In the short and medium term, there's a push towards smaller units, rentals, and flexible housing, but that's short and medium term. Our workforce will continue to need attainable rental housing and moderate priced ownership options. But we really do have a good location here, and rehabilitation and preservation is really important. So then demographics. Again, what's driving the type of housing that we have, the housing size and the typology. As you can see here, compared to the state and some of our peer cities, actually our household size, while decreasing, is on par or a little bit higher than some of our neighbors. We have a lot of smaller households now and single person living arrangements. But again, our housing stock doesn't really reflect that. And young adults are heavily renters, but ownership rises steadily with age. Home ownership increases with age as mortgage obligations decline. So again, a lot of things tied to demographics. And then here's sort of the burden, housing cost burden, and vulnerability and instability. Again, I'm not intending for you guys to really review any of this right today. So key observations from the demographics. Housing demand persists through household churn, lifestyle changes, and tenure shifts. That's really, we've got people who want to stay in this community in all aspects of their life, but their housing situation doesn't necessarily match where they are in that cycle. There is a demand for small units and diverse living arrangements. Housing options are needed along the affordability continuum, not just at the lowest level. These demographics like our urban lifestyle. We do need rental housing here, and there's an opportunity for reinvestment and repositioning, particularly in that missing middle section. Housing inventory, so they've looked at every housing unit in the city and tried to characterize it. And as we can tell, most of our housing stock is that pre-1940, whether it's multifamily or single family. And not surprisingly, we've got our higher assessed values at the southern part of the city. And let's see, what's this one? So sort of combining those things together, are there overlapping trends that we can see between age, condition, and location? And there's a thing called naturally occurring affordable housing, which is housing that is just priced at a lower level, even though it's not considered quote unquote affordable housing. And this is primarily how housing affordability is dealt with in our city right now. Here's special populations within our city. Again, a lot of information for people to take a look at. And so what are the key observations from housing inventory? Not surprisingly, we have limited greenfield development opportunities, but a lot of infill redevelopment opportunities. There's a limit on flexibility and mobility and getting people into homeownership. Preservation, maintenance, and reinvestment is really should be a priority of our community. And again, affordability is an important component of all of this. It's a repeat. And then they get into a little bit of the market analysis. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Talks about recent developments and what that means. I want to skip ahead. Let me talk a little bit here about, as you remember, we added in with council's approval, a focus on artist housing and creative spaces, and that's been really amazing. A steering committee's been created. There's been 2 artist focus groups, a tour, special meetings, equity and space meeting, and getting some real funding people in the room, because there's a particular challenge around artist housing. And you can see some really cool photos here of all the engagement that happened around that. And I wanted to try to capture it in one line, and I don't think it does, but the arts are not an extra. They're really a part of the fabric of this community. That's the big takeaway that I've taken from this task, is that there's a real opportunity here to leverage and work with this amazing arts community that we have in the community. But there are limitations to what they can do right now. One example is we've got a lot of artists who are working out of their single family homes, and they work with materials that emit fumes, and the single family home doesn't have a requirement to have the proper ventilation, and that costs money. So is there a way maybe that the city can assist people converting their spaces to allow them to work in their single family home?
Did the tour of the artist housing include all parts of the city?
It covered all parts of the city. We're creating a map that's going to show that, because we really have a tremendous and diverse geographically and every other aspect of artists and artist spaces in the city. So it's really amazing. Spaces you wouldn't even realize are art spaces.
That would be acceptable for maker spaces and artists, kilns and everything.
Right. So just this is what I wanted to spend a little extra time on tonight. So this is their preliminary gaps analysis, and these are the steps that get you to this last slide that I want to point out, which is this one here. So you can see the red is obviously where the gaps are, the green is where we have sufficient inventory or sufficient opportunities. And what's not surprising is that there's a gap on the low end of both rental and ownership. The surprise is that there's a gap on the high end. And what's happening, and this is will get sussed out a little bit further, is that the folks on the higher end who can't find a place to own or rent, they can move down an income band and rent or own in that income band. So what starts to happen is there's a compression. And that's where our mismatch and our gap is really happening, is that while the inventory is there for people who are making between $58,000 and $77,000, on paper, it's not actually there in practice, because people who make more money than that are occupying those spaces. And so what's been a surprise to me, and I think this will come out, is that we will need, one of the recommendations will be, we need more market rate housing of both types, rental and owners. So for those of you who thought this was just gonna be an affordable housing study, it's not that, it's actually showing some other aspects that are quite interesting. And so there's a couple of slides here on housing needs that I'm not gonna get into, but this is again, sort of taking the data, moving it from gaps to needs, and then ultimately we're gonna get recommendations. So last couple slides here, cross-pollination with other studies. The housing team, Stantec has already met with ZoneCo, our zoning team, and the housing typologies, which is gonna be a big part of the recommendations, is gonna be shared between those two parties because ultimately we wanna make sure our zoning code allows for those housing typologies. And we're hoping that that happens in August, that sort of cross-pollination. And then the new, Stantec has met with our building folks, the building commissioner, and we're gonna have a meeting with the housing folks to understand the preservation side of things. And ICC, who we're bringing on board to do the building housing code updates, will be briefed on the project. One example of this is that single staircase options are something that many communities throughout the country are looking at. The Ohio Building Code doesn't necessarily permit that. And so that's a limitation on a housing typology. So we want to explore with ICC if that's something that we could do, just as an example. Last few slides. So again, here's the schedule. And what I wanted to ask you today is, you can see here in the last 3 months of the year, we've got in 3A, a TAC meeting, which is that advisory group, a community meeting, which was actually the second community meeting, which was earlier in the schedule, and then a council presentation at the very end. I'd like to propose, and I've spoken about this with our consultant team, that we flip the community meeting and the council meeting so that in August or September, August hopefully, they come and they present to you their preliminary recommendations. That gives you guys the opportunity to provide input on that. Then after that input is integrated in September, before the document is finalized, there's a community meeting to get the community's input, and primarily on how to prioritize these recommendations. So if that's okay with everyone, that we schedule something for like the end of August to bring our consultant team in and sit around the table. Then the homework assignment will be to go through this presentation and particularly that scope of work and make sure that the things that we want them to recommend are being considered.
And you'll send that to us.
And this will all get sent to you to review. Yeah.
I think that makes sense. I will say that we're gonna have to do that, and we're gonna have to do a zoning code update workshop, so maybe that should be a special. That's not on a Monday, unless there's a Monday that we can vote just to those two things, but that seems like that's gonna be both big topic.
So you're suggesting late August as opposed to what, the third week of September or something like that?
Yeah, because again, at the way it was planned out here, that would be as they're wrapping up the report, which is already too late to do that.
So we really need to get that on the calendar.
We do it 5 Mondays in August if we wanted to do the 31st.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, well, I'd already sent some dates to Addie for the week before that as like for the zoning code, but if we wanna do it Monday.
I know, it's just
won't be
like,
there for that, but it's okay.
come back all refreshed and burn out before the month's over.
Do you want, if you're not available the 31st?
I'll be out of the country for the last 10 days of August, so.
Well, I mean, that's, we should still think about what we need to do. All right, thank you for that. That was.
And just a reminder, it's up on the screen. There's QR codes. Go visit the story map to learn more about this. This is to the public. Take the survey, and then you can always send your comments or questions to planning.
Brilliantly done in 15 minutes.
That's right.
Thank you.
Well, he's next on the agenda too, so we're
Yeah,
reserving his own.
If it's okay, I wanted to just give Eric Elmy 2 minutes. 2 minutes to talk about something. We're planting the seed for for something down the road.
Good evening, everyone. Unfortunately, that was a last minute decision, so I didn't make any presentation for you guys. Last month, through our law department, we requested some public records from the other municipalities, such as Shaker Heights, Moreland Hills, Beechwood, South Euclid, and Lakewood, to see how many permits they're issuing per year in general. Those permits, anything that requires a building inspection, such as electrical, plumbing, mechanical, or just a purely building. We received some of those numbers. Shaker Heights, we're still waiting to receive from them. Moreland Hills issues 673 permits only per year. Beechwood and South Euclid, they are issuing approximately between 1,500 to 1,600 permit per year. Lakewood, who resemble us a lot, they issue a little bit below 2,700. Cleveland Heights issues 3,300 plus. So we are almost like a 700 more than Lakewood and double up Beechwood and Euclid, South Euclid as well. Our numbers this from 2025 resembles a lot 2024 as well. On 2024 we issued 3,400. Yes. Technically, we are giving you an overview of the volume of our city, of the building department here, which of course parallelly works with the planning and the housing as well. Housing inspector is going for point of sale. They issue something, find some violation notice, of course, those work may require permit as well. So it's not just the building division here. I'm talking about the volume you have on the housing as well. Way more than other municipalities, and it's just a good news actually. It's very good news.
Do you think that's because of point of sale?
Not necessarily.
Because that's a differentiation with other some.
This is due probably to many different facts. One could be point of sale, but also we have our own inspectors now, who they can go around and issue a stop work order if something's not working or not, without permit or not. That's one of the other facts. And but I think people got overall the message in 2024 and 2025. Cleveland Heights are not joking, they're into the business as well. So the numbers was looking for the 2022 all the way to now. 2023 was higher. It was high enough as same as 2025 and 2024. But we see the increase coming up since 2024.
You implemented some efficiencies too as well in the permit process, didn't you?
Correct. So right now, like some municipalities, they're only doing issuing permits purely online. We have both. We have online and in person as well. Yeah. So we are more encouraging people communicating with emails online because there's always a record into it. They can apply online at 2 a.m. if they wanted to. But if they are not computer savvy, they can always come in person as well. But overall, it's numbers are good.
So we want to periodically, whether it's building or housing, give you updates. It goes over to the question from last Monday night about, telling council some of the good news sometimes. So this is one of the pieces. Yeah.
Well, I mean, this helps us put things in perspective a little bit, not necessarily the comparison with other cities, but I think what would be helpful is a little bit more detail on, past, past years. I mean, you told a little bit about 2023, 2024, but, looking at that trend, that seems to be stuff that does get looked at by somebody operationally. And you're right, good news. I mean, share some of that with us. And it's mostly important when it comes to budget time because it gives us the ability to scale to get a sense of, okay, this department is asking for X number of more people.
Correct.
Why? And so in the past, in budget cycles, we haven't gotten that information.
Which we will provide. We were talking about exactly. Tonight, just giving an idea of what's the volume we are talking here. And myself, at the past, I worked for the small municipality and a large municipality, such as Cleveland. And when I started here in 2024, I was quite a bit surprised by the volume of the work here. overall. And then I said, okay, maybe it's 2024, and then 2025, my goodness, the same thing last year, what's going on here? So we talked about it and did some more search, and of course, population is condensed, and the only thing who resemble us is Lakewood on the west side, geographically and demographic as well. So
I'd be interested in how many of those permits are related to a project that received a GROW program tax abatement, because it could be somebody's just fixing electric, or it could be somebody's renovating their entire house, and so it'd be good to also get a scale. My initial thought when you said how many permits we had is that, well, our whole housing stock is so old that people are constantly pulling permits to fix things or, rehab, et cetera. So some sort of scale or scope would be helpful.
you can move on that.
Well, thank you for the extra few minutes.
No problem, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. So we're gonna move right along to the Landmark Commission. So similar to the short-term rentals, this is like the follow-up to the many discussions we've had on the ordinance. And I think it was pretty, I'm just pulling up I think it was pretty evident what has,
It's a spring version.
no, that's,
Okay.
that says, final version from March, that's not the right version. This one had been final pack.
I have the other.
It's the one I sent out an email.
What's next?
So,
Just to look at the red line.
yeah, I think the red line is probably the best document to look at. And I was hoping, we gave some initial feedback, again, just like short-term rentals, we gave some initial feedback to the law department, and you have come back, Director Hannah, with Director Zamp with some recommendations. So do you just wanna give like a overview of where we landed on a couple of the
Sure.
items?
So the high points were the deletion of the proximity concept throughout the chapter. There seemed to be essentially unanimity on council to do that. In addition, the historic district concept was restored in a way that's broken out more separately from like a landmark concept that would include districts and individual properties. So this is more like the current ordinance than the last version that council saw was, in that you have a designation for single properties or landmarks and then a designation for districts. There were a few small clarifications with regard and tweaks for like meetings and things of that nature. One of the additional large concepts was consent, and the consensus of council in the last discussion was to maintain the existing consent requirements for historic district designations. And initially, it sounded as if council was leaning toward a full restoration of the consent requirement for all landmarks. And then there was some discussion of the potential need for the city to landmark a property over a lack of consent or over an objection of a property owner. And so I think we were charged with coming up with something to try to accommodate that. And so what we ended up doing was to restore the existing consent provisions for single landmarks, but then to provide for sort of a supermajority approval process for the Landmark Commission if it thought it was important to landmark designate a property and couldn't get the consent of the owner, to send a resolution to council with a 2/3 majority approval, and then provide up to 90 days, I think was the period for council to determine by a 2/3 majority as well that it would override the requirement for consent. So in an exceptional case where there's a really important property and consent can't be obtained, that mechanism would allow for that to be done, but it shouldn't result in a lot of requests for council action to override, an owner to come before you. So that was how we balanced that out. I think it works. It's not necessarily the only way that it could work, but it seems straightforward.
And then
On-
I'll just,
sure.
that's in 143.081. Just so.
Yes, right.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's 081. There was a little bit of renumbering. 08 is general designation of landmarks, and again, that reverted to essentially the status quo provision. But for the reference to 081, which is procedure for designation without owner consent. And then 085 was sort of the restored and separate language for designating historic districts. And a question did come up about this, I think from the Landmark Commission. I think it's here. Maybe I'm conflating this with another section.
No, I thought, no, you had, it's B in this one. It says.
Oh,
owner
each,
consent.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, so in 143.085B, the provision says that greater than 50% of property owners must consent to the designation. Each individual parcel shall have a single owner vote. And the question was, well, how, does the Landmark Commission need to convene some sort of election or something along those lines? So we looked at that a little bit today and came up with language that would, I think, make that straightforward. Might even have copies here. Which would say each individual parcel rather shall have a single owner vote. And then we would add, with consent indicated by the signatures of the owners on a petition or similar consent document, which may be signed by the owners of multiple affected parcels, so long as the relationship between owners and properties and parcels is clearly indicated. And this was a little bit like a discussion we had on one of the proposals that was in the Landmark Commission modified ordinance, which had separate petitions being required, I think, for removal of the designation perhaps. And I think we had some conversation about how that could be difficult to manage administratively, and our recommendation there was that, multiple signatures on one petition could reliably evidence that same intent, and so we just kind of flipped that around. That is not in the version that council received. You guys see this? And then I think the last significant change was with regard to appeal, and after looking at appeal of Landmark Commission decisions. And so after looking at Lakewood and Shaker Heights, the proposal is to have Landmark Commission decisions be appealable to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that some other communities do it and it seems to work and it seems stable. The BZA is a body that is conversant with and accustomed to dealing with issues of this type and conducting quasi-judicial proceedings in which they determine the legal rights of an applicant, which is really what's happening here, and is also necessary in order for a decision to be appealable to Common Pleas Court under Revised Code Chapter 2506. There was the previous appeal provision kind of had an appeal to council. It wasn't clear exactly what the process might be at council, upon further review. And then it said appealable to court under 2506, which may or may not actually be available depending upon the nature of the hearing that the council might have had. So the feeling here was that this is a clean pathway to a body that has experience doing this, and that should make the process work better for appellants and for the city. It would require some modifications to the language that describes the jurisdiction of the Board of Zoning Appeals. And I don't know, we didn't talk with them about what they might think about having additional cases come to them, but based upon the lack of appeals or challenges in recent years, it seems like it probably isn't a big burden.
Would you see a time constraint the appeal has to be filed within a certain amount of time from when the decision was made by the Landmark Commission, so it doesn't linger out there, or?
Yeah, I think that the last draft had 10 days, which I thought was short.
We changed it to 30.
So we changed it to 30, and then under the ORC, the appeal from a final decision of an administrative body is also to be brought to court within 30 days. So then it's all consistent and people can remember the time period.
So to clarify, that is for a new designation only. Is there an appeals process for an existing designated landmark?
It would have to be a decision of the Landmark Commission.
Okay.
So it could be on a certificate of appropriateness. Is another potential point of appeal. And I suppose it could also apply in the event of a request for removal of landmark status that was denied.
Sure, on a new designation. Or a
On an
new
existing
safer-
one, yeah,
okay,
like if
so
they-
a property owner could request to be removed, that's denied, and then there's an appeals process. Okay.
But so it has to be a final decision of the commission in order for it to be appealable then to the board.
I would ask the Landmark Commission, since you graciously attended our meeting this evening, how you feel about this current revised document.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say again, we're excited that this is happening. And I think the adjustments seem appropriate to us. We did have that one question just on process. But it feels and is true that this has been a very thoughtful process on our end, but also on council's end. Planning and with council, so council, yes. And so we appreciate.
I think the draft landed in a really good spot, balancing what the Landmarks Commission was trying to achieve and listening to concerns about owner consent. I really liked the creative approach that the law director came up with to address that. And I think it is important to have a path to overcome owner consent in those rare, when you can't obtain it in those rare situations. I had a very minor comment on this that can be addressed easily. We had spent time working on making the ordinance more concise in some of the language. And so you probably noticed this already. In the defined terms, we defined properties to include district, site, building, structure, object. And when you broke out again and went back to the language separating the district from the individual, you kind of use the term landmarks for just the individual, and then historic district or landmark. So it's just
Okay.
a language thing that I
We can
think
look
got
at that,
lost in the translation of going back. It's easy to address, but I think it's great where you all landed. I really do. So
I'll make a
Thank
note
you.
for that.
And for those watching, we have the chair of the Landmark Commission, Maisie Adams, and Margaret Land on the Landmark Commission. And I'm sorry, remind me.
Oh, Wendy Naylor,
Wendy, yes,
historic
sorry.
consultant with Naylor Wellman.
Naylor Wellman, the outside counsel.
Question, and I didn't notice this before. Why did we change the qualification provisions from what's in the current statute? Did anyone notice that?
What do you mean, what provision are you on?
14303. Hold on. Shall be a resident of the city at the time of appointment. Well, that suggests that if someone leaves the city, they could still remain on. We took out the 5-year residency requirement unless waived by city council. We took out the provision that qualifications should be kept on file and available for public inspection.
So those, I think, are changes that emanated from the Landmark Commission's process, and I don't think those got discussion from council, and
Yeah.
so we didn't make any further
Yeah, I
changes.
didn't really look at them previously. Does anyone have an objection to going back to what was in the original?
I think the only change we had made, we added an architect requirement to, as you
It
recall,
could be a,
that there be a member
Yeah.
that's an architect. You're talking about qualifications.
And I'm fine with adding additional
Okay.
requirements on
Okay.
that raises the
In case
level
we
of
had, we were
professionalism.
thinking about changes down the road, so we added an architect being a member of the commission at one point, in case there would be applicants that were coming directly to Landmarks at some point for review and bypassing architecture review board, that was in discussion. So you can go either way on that and change that later.
and I seem to remember in the, oh, go ahead.
In the past, when we've had open positions, we don't get a lot of applications for the board. And that 5-year period of living in Cleveland Heights was limiting.
Which we can waive if applicable. I
Yeah.
think my preference is that we try and have longer term residents in the city. And if we can't meet that, then well, council would be glad to waive it.
Can we waive it?
Yeah,
Administrative
well,
services?
under the current provision, we can.
And what about ongoing residency?
Well, I think you need to be a member of, I think you need to be a resident of the city, not only at the time of
The residency is a
appointment,
qualification.
but you
that
must
needs to-
continue to be a resident of the city during your service.
So the 5 years is longer than council or mayor, right?
Yes, council's 1 year. I don't know, mayor.
I think it's the same, yeah. I'm just pointing that out. I don't know, and if there have been issues, council could, I think, overcome it with right language, but maybe I don't remember seeing that anywhere else.
Well, let's have, I think it does help that you've lived in the city for some time and have some appreciation of our architecture and our unique neighborhoods, maybe even more so than serving in the government.
I think the longevity is good. I mean,
I'm fine with it, yeah, I was just raising.
So how about if we drop it to 3 years and not 5? Again, making it waivable by council.
And the, just to follow up, so there was a reference to an architect being one of the members, but I think you pointed this out, Eric, that it shall be persons who have demonstrated special interest in one of the following areas, and there's architecture, history, historic preservation, law, or realty.
So architecture was
Yeah.
We
added
had
there.
talked about an architect at one point and it may have come out. You can take care of that in a later draft.
It's the same language in the proposed versus the current. Because we struggle as it is to get architects to serve on our architectural review board. That's true.
Okay, so 3 years to become a member and then residency maintained throughout.
Well, I would just simply use the language in our current 14303
Just change it from
and
5 to 3.
just change, yes.
Now I went back to the codified and I see what you're referencing. Any other, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for the members of the commission. So to me, the two large changes from, when we last discussed or from the proposal were around owner consent and then the historic districts. From your perspective, do these changes, what are the main benefits that you see from moving from our current ordinance to this proposal, given that those two significant changes were made in the interim?
So I think around owner consent, this provides a pathway to overcome it, which is significant for us. And so if the community and council recognizes that there is a substantial property that we don't want to lose in Cleveland Heights, there's a pathway for that to happen without owner consent. So that's an improvement.
Sort of a middle ground from our current structure.
Right now that we require owner consent no matter what.
And then what was proposed was essentially just
No
being
longer.
able to overrule So given the current structure of a
It's a good
pathway to
compromise
that.
And then the other one around the districts, I think is more just how it's getting defined. I don't think there's significant change, it's just how it sits in the ordinance, right?
Mhm,
That's my reading.
correct.
But we'll ask them.
No, that's correct.
But you
Because-
still see that as a substantial improvement from the current.
I don't think there is, we didn't change, it was more around logistics around the districts than it was on definition
We
or
worked to
how we
clarify
have
the process,
Right.
consistency in language, so that a user coming in and trying to read, figure all this out, we tried to
Thank
lay
you.
it out that way. So I think that was a big plus as well.
So I think it's fun.
And then other than those two, are there other like major wins for you in this that you think are a big improvement from where we are? Or is it just, like you said, clarifying logistics?
The demolition,
Provisions.
clarifying that and really, you know, that made a big difference. And actually, I do not wanna dismiss the making it more clear and easier
Right.
because that is significant.
Just cleaning up a lot of language throughout.
It's really significant for us just in practice, but also for the public when you're talking to current owners, but also potential property owners. It really makes a difference that you can read it and understand.
Makes sense.
This was, we really appreciate this process here.
Any other?
Yeah, question for the law director. So what avenue of appeal does a homeowner have in the event that council passes a resolution upholding over the owner's objection, their designation as a landmark?
I think it would end up being something in the nature of a taking theory. Because you can't send council's decision to the BZA.
Right.
But they would I mean, they could argue they have a claim undertaking, it's whether the court would agree with that or not. But in my thinking about this was for like a property, I mean, yes, it could be in that case, but it's also a property that we can't find the owner or, you know, that we can't have that, you know, it's an out of country, or, you know, there's all sorts of
Yeah,
cases
right.
where we're not gonna be able to.
We can look at that
Yeah,
further.
I'm
and
a little
provide additional
concerned about
information.
that. I mean, just from my perspective, it needs to be a high barrier to designate property over an owner's objection.
Do you wanna make it instead of 2/3, what's the other one,
Do 3/4 would be 6.
Yeah, let's,
Well-
let me just give this some thought.
But it's 2/3 from the commission and then it's another 2/3 when we get it.
Right.
So, I mean, those are two
It's like a
Big barriers.
constitutional amendment, it's pretty.
That's
Yeah,
right.
but you know, most property owners have some avenue of appeal from our quasi judicial bodies.
well, just to put it back, like this is a landmark designation, it would be restricting, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you're all, yeah, but restricting any changes to the external, but this still would not prevent a property owner from changing the inside of the property, nor perhaps adding on, you know, all of that. It's not, you know, allowing the city to demolish or force you to keep your property. It's merely the external historical structure.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, I just, again, we're let me look at the statute again, Bill, and I'd appreciate you weighing in on
Sure.
that as well.
Sure.
So easy come, easy go. So easy come, we vote for this and then we find out that the process is failing, we could adjust our rules. So I mean, there's ways that I think we can address this if it becomes problematic. I guess what I'm suggesting, let's not overthink
There
this
must
too
have
much.
been there must have been examples of something like this elsewhere.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, oh, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
go.
And Director Hannah suggested, you know, as option that should we move this into the zoning code, and I would say no, precisely for that reason, because it's easier to revise this as needed outside of the
That's true.
zoning code. So I would leave it where it is as a, you
I
know,
don't know if I got into that tonight, but that was so I think
Yeah,
you
your
would
comment.
still at least need zoning code amendments to allow these decisions to be appealed there, right? But you don't necessarily need to move the chapter there. That would be an easy way of saying any decisions of administrative bodies under the code. But it's not necessary.
right, and I just say that in support of Councilman Pasha's assertion that, you know, if we put this into ordinance, then we can revise it if we need to, and it wouldn't require a complicated process like we do for the zoning code, so. Okay, we hadn't really nailed down next steps past this.
If I could, I'm sorry. I'm looking at, I actually didn't notice this initially. The removal of landmark designation language it was essentially moved, but I don't remember a decision to get rid of the requirement that the property has lost or has ceased to meet the criteria for designation or the qualities for which originally designated. Is that maybe just a typo of putting the other language back in?
Wait, where
Okay.
are you on 143.12? Where?
I'm in 08 right now, looking at language that was struck from the last version. And then, in 12,
Let's move to 12, right?
correct.
Okay.
And so the language it's essentially the same, except I actually like the fact that there's a standard provided. It had read, the owners of a landmark may petition the commission to remove landmark status from a property that has ceased to meet the criteria for designation and the qualities for which it was originally designated have been lost or destroyed by submitting a letter. And that loss of those qualities does not appear in 12, and I think that's worth reinserting.
Scrivener's error.
Sure, yeah. But just in case anybody, I thought I would mention it in case anyone has an issue with that being done.
No, I think the last conversation we had about this, I think we were okay. We were okay with doing that.
Yeah, I don't remember anyone asking for that to come out.
You're just saying it in the recent change that got lost.
In this last step,
Just got lost in
Yeah.
translation and just needs to be put back.
Correct.
Yeah, I think it needs to get put back.
Okay.
So just quickly, next steps on this. Councilman Cobb, we might need your input on this since you have a pending, I think it's the last pending issue on this.
I just get a quick Gemini Google search.
So, I mean,
I got the answer to my question.
okay.
I
So,
don't know the law director needs to look at it provided Google Gemini has given me a correct legal.
okay. So then you're
Happy to
good?
discuss it,
with-
yeah.
So does that mean you're good with how we have it drafted?
I'm gonna look at it again. I need to, Google Gemini says they make mistakes sometimes, so I just wanna make sure. But they've given me some good information and sources to look at.
So I guess my question is, you know, I think that this is less dramatic changes than had originally proposed, and that we should get a revised draft based on, you know, the input, the things that we've caught, and then introduce that, you know, after we come back from recess. Does anybody feel that we need to have a public hearing on this, or other than having it for one, you know, the standard 2 readings that we would normally have? I mean, I'm open to consensus.
I just wanna make sure that we put a lot of public notice out about what we're doing. And make sure that everyone, particularly in some of the neighborhoods that may have a concern over this, are aware of what we're doing, and they do have an opportunity to come to our city council meetings and address us, particularly on this. I think the controversial part is gonna be on the owner's consent.
I mean, and we can always push it out to third reading if we're getting a lot of people coming. I just, we're already struggling to public hearings and all, so I think if we're okay with just going into first reading.
Put it in the queue.
Okay,
So first reading on the 17th of August.
yeah,
That's what we're in.
I mean, is that, do we have, yeah, okay.
And then
that'd
the
be
second
great.
reading on third.
Yeah.
31st, that's our next meeting.
17th, August 17th.
After the 17th.
We
Or is
don't
it
have.
Oh, no, it'll be in
Special.
September.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we just can advertise it as such.
Well, then there's time, right? Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for all of that. Director Zams, we wanna just go through the hot list, the zoning code update. I don't know if this will take 30 minutes unless, we have a particularly robust opinions on this, but do you want, should we all, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That's interesting.
Do you want us all just to pull it up and you wanna walk us through?
Yeah, I think I can walk you through.
Which, how old is this? Oh, this is going back. This is Jason Stein. They attempted to do this earlier.
So just as a brief introduction, we, the staff, have put together a list of things that we want the consultant team to look at closer, or we need to talk to them about. And we'll go through that list, but we want to make sure that there are things, if there's anything that you would like the consultant team to look at, with the idea that we will provide this list to the consultant team. And then when we schedule this workshop with them, in sometime in August, they'll be able to come back and say, okay, so here's your issue with such and such. This is how, we're gonna recommend moving forward with that. And so it's gonna give, I think, a double opportunity here for input from you guys. As we have plenty of opportunities for input going forward, but before it gets too far. And just as a reminder, there's a whole scale comprehensive look at the zoning that they're already doing, so there's a lot of things that may already be incorporated. That's why I tried to provide both the scope of work and and the original RFP to show that there's things like business district boundaries and all the both regulations that they're taking a look at as well.
And there are things that have come up, if I can just summarize like a few things that have come up since we started this process. We've talked about minimum house sizes for just in general. We've talked about invasive species, which I know is on the list. We've talked about, there was a third one that was in my, which I believe is on the hot list of, not grandfathered, but
Non-conforming uses.
what
Non-conforming.
non-conforming uses that are affecting, the ability of owners to get financing. So those are things that have come up that, have already been put into the queue. And this, just for the rest of council, like this hot list is not, I just wanna reiterate, is not the only topics. This is just if we have input on these in particular or additional ones to make sure that are being covered in the update.
These are the ones where we feel like the consultant team will need some more information coming from us, the staff, and / council,
So
as they look at them in closer detail.
do you wanna go through them? Yeah, okay.
And this was no particular order, but it probably was the order that we were thinking of things at the time. And so we tried to provide some language here. I'm not gonna read everything, but start out with conditional use permits. So we have as of right things that happen in our code, and then everything. Right? So everything else is the things that we want to allow, but we want to allow with some conditions. And so those conditions have to match a impact that we're asking or concerned about. And so that's number one, is like, let's make sure that our conditional uses are actual uses that meet conditions and aren't just either uses we want to see as of right or don't want to see at all. But then more so than that is, how do we then continue to review and enforce a conditional use permit? An example that I'll give you, one that drives us crazy, are the auto uses in our city. So they're conditionally permitted. They tend to cause impacts to our neighborhoods. And one of the biggest issues is parking on these smaller auto use lots. So how do we enforce that they were approved for a conditional use permit. So we've tried to institute a parking plan. It's not in our code, it's something we wanna add. So you've gotta submit a parking plan, that gets approved by council or by commission. And then we, the zoning inspector, can go out and enforce that. Right now, we don't have any of those conditions built into the code. A second aspect of this, and the planning commission sees this all the time, currently, when there's a change of ownership, the new owner has to come back to the planning commission and get it reapproved. Now, there's an advantage to that because they understand all of the conditions that. But it's also somewhat of a burdensome thing if they're just doing the same exact use as the previous owner was doing. So is there a better way for us to handle that? So that's conditional use permits. Any questions around the table on that?
Not specific to the auto repair businesses, but in our conditional use permits, do we talk about garbage collection at all? And the amount of like either bins you have to have or put regulations on, you know, making sure things get cleaned up? I mean, behind a lot of our properties, and I don't know if this is the right section, but we seem to be getting a lot of complaints about just, I don't wanna say illegal dumping, but just not enough garbage collection in a particular valid use. You know, go back in and say, hey, look, you know, you were supposed to either get a dumpster of this size or, you know, some blanket code that says you can't have overflowing garbage.
So the answer is it's both this section and not this section. There's the broader issue of dumpster enclosures. I think we have it listed later on. It's a big issue that we deal with. It's how garbage is set up on a site and screened and all that sort of stuff. But for the conditional use permits, what we're saying is if you don't do this, we can bring you back and revoke your conditional use permit, as opposed to just an as by right. We can't stop the use from happening. We can fine them or violate them for that particular part of the code. So that's an example of where the conditional use permit has an advantage.
Well, I think there's certain areas, I mean, a lot of times you go through a rewrite and you wanna make things easier, okay? But I almost think there's times where we need to be a little bit more strict.
Yeah.
And, you know, this particular is one where I think we need to be more strict.
No, I think you put it really well, is that this is an opportunity in this hot topics this is where we tighten the screws a little bit more on certain things.
I mean, I know we're gonna do this, but I would like to see a review of what we currently require conditional use permits for. And I know that we've had some interest in perhaps making a conditional use permit required for a smoke shop or a dispensary. Or looking at that to manage the proliferation of that, you know, in some way. So, and then also, you know, I had brought up to you, I don't think we have anywhere in town where a data center operator would want to build a data center, but that is something that we can clearly make a non-permitted use through the code also. Again, not related to conditional permits, but just in terms of like permitted, conditional, and non-permitted uses.
And we did on that very specific question, we asked our consultant team, and this will be clarified in the new code, but our code is a exclusionary code. What I mean by that is that if it's not a permitted use, it's not permitted. If it's not listed as a permitted or conditional use, it's not permitted. So if a data center is not listed, it would mean it's not a permitted use.
I've got a lot of concerns about data centers, not what you would think, I think with everything that you see in the newspaper, but I think the problem we have with data centers is that people have been allowed to recklessly put them up and nobody's thinking about them. If they're regulated more, we wouldn't be seeing the problems we have. So, I mean, with that thinking, you know, make sure that you gotta get a conditional use permit for them.
I was saying not permit them.
Well, I know that's what you're thinking, but I'm not saying that that's not, well, first of all, I think realistically, well, I don't know, maybe someone would put a data center at Severance.
And I will say I already took care of that because we made it a non-permitted use when we did the so if we adopt the zoning overlay as planning commission sent it over, that was one of the discussions we had. Was precisely for that reason, that's maybe the last remaining site.
I think if it was regulated the right way, a data center could be fine, but I mean, the problem here is we have had very poor regulation in this state when it comes to data centers. It's been like free, do anything you wanna do without any thinking about the ramifications.
So for these, are you looking for input on the individual topics or just that we want these topics and or additional topics to be discussed?
It's either or. I would say that these are things that even if you guys show no interest in them, we want the consultant team to look at. So if you have anything to add to our concern or our question, and certainly additional topics.
I mean, besides running it by the consultants, I'd really like to hear a legal opinion about what the parameters are for restricting the number of certain kinds of businesses. You know, just so that we have some idea. I mean, there's no sense in us brainstorming about things that are not legal, so.
The good thing is that Sean Suter, the head of Zoneco, former attorney for Cincinnati's planning division. He's a practicing lawyer. It's one of the reasons why I made the recommendation to hire him. So we already have a legal
with that team, good.
view. But yeah, law is gonna start to become a part of these conversations pretty soon. Anything else on conditional use permits? Next up, something that I think you all will agree with is meeting processes and notice requirements. It's something we've dealt with, sort of had that tension throughout every project, every big project. We just spoke about it in the previous session about notifying people on short-term rentals. So we want to make sure that we're noticing meetings properly and then the meetings themselves are being run properly. And we've been working very closely with law to make sure that we're getting that more in line with really what is recommended.
I would like to add also that, because we had this discussion in the meeting with admin services with all the commission chairs and committee chairs. They need to get, for the Open Meetings Act transparency, all those bodies need to have their agendas posted on the website as well as their minutes once approved.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and we
Mayor
are.
Patrice had a comment.
I just wanted to note that after the Administrative Services Committee meeting, where the heads of the boards, commissions, and committees were present, we sat down, identified a lot of things such as city-owned email accounts and other things that we'd be pulling together and distributing to folks, so that's forthcoming.
Thank you.
I mean, I've been talking about public notice for maybe over 5 years to try and fix this and have a larger radius. So I'm very excited about what the recommendations will be, so we can actually get to neighbors that care about a particular site or a particular change.
Just one note on this, you'll see it in the sub bullets, is that there is a difference between meeting and hearing. And we just need to understand, because I think we're all confused about that terminology, but in the legal sense, it makes a difference. Next bullet, non-conforming uses and structures. This is an example of where the industry has outpaced the planners. Like, appraisers haven't been calling us up saying, by the way, insurance requirements have changed and you're gonna start to get all these questions. So we get questions all the time about properties that are non-conforming. What can they do to rebuild or even just to appraise it? So we wanna make sure that that is handled. There were a couple of inquiries in the past couple of years where the person couldn't essentially do what they wanted with the property based on the new insurance requirements, the way that our zoning is written.
Yeah, they weren't able to refinance like to a better interest rate, and that's how this came to our attention a couple of years ago, actually.
And just yell out if you have any questions. Supportive housing. This is something that you probably don't hear all that much of, but we have to deal with on a regular basis. Is people who are looking to have sort of congregated or supportive living arrangements. Group homes would be the term that a lot of people use, but it's actually not a term in our code. And it just is unclear, it's subjective, and there's gotta be a better way to do it. We've asked a whole bunch of people about this, and every municipality does it differently, and none of those answers seem to be satisfactory from our point of view, so we want hopefully this update to address that.
I agree with you about the form. You mentioned the form, so I looked at it today.
Yeah. It asks some good questions, but they're not necessarily.
They're not the right questions.
So home occupations, we do allow some home occupations, but not all. And does it really reflect current job realities? You know, an example is there are people who do a lot of logistics in their home, and maybe they themselves go to the UPS store. But technically in our code right now, we might consider that outside of the definition of a home occupation. So again, wanna look at how we're defining it, how we're permitting it. Does that match up with people actually doing it?
It feels like that just reading the original, that it was somehow envisioned to be craftsmen and artists, that would be the main uses of it. And you know, there's so many professional people who have individual professional practices. And you know, I think that is probably something to address if you have, let's say, a psychotherapist or somebody who has a small medical practice and there's a constant stream of patients and it's referenced. But that I would think would be the thing that would affect residents most, is not what's happening in the house, but what's happening outside.
Planned development districts, so if you remember with the Park Synagogue property, that was a very intense process to sort of create a whole new zone out of the blue. And that was specific to that site. But we also have other special districts in the city that are just there. They don't really have any regulations attached to them. So this is just getting a fresh look at those special districts.
Do you feel that, just looking at the planning development and districts and then the next one, subdivisions, do you feel you're going to be considering whole new classifications of ways to think about areas of the city? We've talked about there's form-based zoning, subdivision plan. What do you see coming out of this study?
So Xavier is shaking his head, and he's right to shake his head, but I would say it a little bit differently. We're a built-out city, so there's very few opportunities for something to radically change, but it doesn't mean that the underlying processes can be really improved. So subdivision regulations is one of those examples of where right now everything falls on an individual property process, and that's just not the way that it's supposed to be. There's supposed to be these regulations that look at it more broadly.
So for example, for our infill housing, where does that fit in this conversation? Because it's such a, you know, enterprise that in some cases is really focused on a specific section of the city.
Yeah, an example I would give is that, let's say we have not just one lot, but a number of lots together, and they want to do something with, so that's where these subdivision regs or a special district would come into play to say like, well, let's plan this thing together as opposed to as individual lots.
That could apply to the Noble Triangle.
Noble Triangle, Severance, you know, like there are these places where there's a conglomeration of properties where things are.
And just to follow up on that, do you feel in this study that the prospect of severance is something that you're taking into account? And are there things that, I don't know whether you can talk about them or not, that you will make propose adjustments as a result of?
Yeah, I think both processes sort of inform each other. They're on different tracks, but the advantage of us being involved in it is that we can transition between those things. So yeah, they shouldn't contradict each other. Auto uses we spoke a little bit about before, and this is really more of a even a larger issue. You know, do we want to permit auto uses in the city, and if so, where? So it's a bigger conversation. You know, everybody loves to go to the neighborhood mechanic, but
Everybody loves
to go to the neighborhood mechanic. They don't want to. Nobody wants to drive half an hour to drop their car off. They want to be able to go around the corner, but there are trade-offs with having that mechanic around the corner. And so, right now, there's a very limited amount of auto repair uses in the city, and so I think we just want to address that head on. It's like, do we want to allow this in a certain place in the city? And if so, let's have regulations that speak to it directly. And then, you know, it's a big part of what Xavier has to do as the zoning inspector is deal with the complaints about these auto uses. Housing, I alluded to this earlier, but you know, there are other studies going on that are going to inform the housing residential side of it. And so we wanna make sure that zone code knows about those and they do. Let's get here. Sorry, that's this page, so next up. Yeah, parking and traffic. An earlier attempt at some zoning changes, we were looking at requiring for conditional permits, traffic and parking management plan. I still think that's a good idea. It just didn't make it through the zoning process, and so we wanna, particularly when we have non-residential uses in residential districts, make sure that there's a plan for parking and traffic so that it doesn't district. And I think there are good examples of places that have done just that. Okay, next page, sign ordinance. Should the sign ordinance be pursued on its own or integrated into larger zoning code update? Our stance right now is that should at this point be integrated into larger zoning code update. While it's something that we deal with on a regular basis, since there's gonna be some other changes around our business districts, we felt like the synergies make more sense to look at holistically as opposed to piecemeal.
Wasn't something just done with either signing regulations?
There's a draft of the sign regulations, we took them pretty far with zone code. But we came to a point where we said, well, if we're gonna be making these other changes to the zoning code that would change the way the sign ordinance would be implemented, should we just wait until the two marry up together at the same time?
So your plan is to merge that work into this work?
Exactly.
In the interest of time, I'm just wondering, is there anything?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, is there anything that either hasn't been on the list or we haven't mentioned that we feel needs to make it into the zoning review? Or that hasn't been in an RFP? I'm just,
I'm happy to see that you'll be discussing the housing code, cause that's a concern of all of ours, so especially opportunities to empower our housing inspectors to assess fines. I'd like the city to encourage via code. And I know that you have had this discussion before, I don't know how far it got, but encourage developers not to use natural gas in their newly built homes. Because its use for cooking and heating and cooling can create safety risks and health hazards, so just to add that. And the invasive species, 1166.04 is landscape design standards. I'd rather not refer to a zoning administrator's list someplace. I'd like to have at least the 5 highest most invasive species listed, and possibly even 10 in the code.
There's a great example of Worthington, Ohio. When that topic came up from the resident, I looked a little bit, and Worthington, Ohio is something worth looking at, specifically about bamboo, but also how they envision invasive species.
And Director Zams had some experience with bamboo, so happy to hear that. I'd like to see a revision and strengthening of the section on feeding wild animals, ordinance 551.01.
That's not in the zoning.
Okay,
That's not in the zoning code, right? Because zoning is,
okay. So it's not
we'll have to
considered,
run separate
It's housing.
legislation.
Is that housing?
so any codes dealing with dead and dying trees and lease ordinances are not included as well.
I think so. What's the code?
Unless it's in our landscape section.
Right.
Yeah, so I think we can, for both of those, we can just make sure that the zoning code, if it doesn't address it already, addresses it properly.
Yeah, that'd be great. It was one was 510 and another one was this leash ordinance is 505, so.
Maybe on the sorry, what did you say on the not the invasive species, the next one that you mentioned. 553. Oh, not feeding the deer. Maybe we can make some mention of like wild animals or something like that in the planning conditional use standards, like injurious, you know, the standards like not injurious to neighbors, including something like that.
Thank you.
So two themes, one around like operational processes, and I'm not sure if this fits more here or on the housing side, but in terms of reviewing what we require, going to planning commission or going to BCA versus an administrative approval with a broader, I guess, goal of trying to match up our city goals with our rules and ensure that the goals that we have are able to be met by the rules that we have and that the rules aren't making these things harder. So for example, we have a goal of reducing reliance on, reducing our carbon footprint. So we should be doing everything possible to make it easier for someone to, insulate and add solar to their home. So I know there have been some changes on that one specifically, but, looking at everything and ensuring that the goals that we have for the city are reflected in our own rules for how we do things down to like permitting and other operational processes. So I'm not sure if that lives here or in, the housing study and the housing code review, but I'd like to see that. And then the other one would be sort of a broader theme about similar to goals, but marrying land use to transportation policy and ensuring that we are maybe getting some recommendations on the zoning code review and in our land use planning that then support transportation planning, such as, if we want to encourage multimodality transportation or increased transit use, which I think there are goals outlined in the climate study. Does our land use get us closer to reaching those goals? So ensuring that we're looking at transportation as well.
Yeah, and just on your last point, to take it one step further, so a land use which is dictated by the zoning provisions that allow for that land use. So it's taking the sort of desired land use and making sure the provisions, the zoning regulations allow for it. So on our tag group for the zoning study, RTA is on the group and the county's on the group who helped in the TOD study. So it's a big focus of making sure that our zoning is aligning with those TOD and transportation principles. Okay. And on the first one, I think it lives both here and in the housing. Thanks.
On your bullet point about transparency standards, I think about the conversations we've had about making some of the processes around inspections and complaints on the building side be more visible to the public and to users, and that the same thing could be applied in thinking about how the public is informed about the processes of zoning and zoning inspections, so that it's visible, so that they aren't necessarily always seeking information about where things are. So.
It's interesting you mentioned that because this was actually meant to talk about window transparency.
Oh, window transparency.
It's been an issue for years. Yeah.
When
I don't know, it was kind of a general thing. How can they?
But you're right, that
I thought you were talking about, information transparency. But the window should be transparent too.
yes.
Well, yes.
Depends.
Yeah. Any,
I'm good.
anything?
I have a question for Brooke, but not on the zoning code.
I mean, and I feel like I've been sending
Yeah.
things over as we've been going through this process, so I'm excited to get the initial feedback.
And again, as a reminder, this is just initial feedback. We're gonna send it off to the consultant team. If you think of anything between now and the workshop, let us know. If you think something in the workshop, let us know. If you think of something after the workshop, there's plenty of time here to make changes. But thank you for your input too.
Real quickly, that Cedar Hill Church question that I had,
Yes.
I still want to get back to that person who lives next door to the parking lot.
Yeah.
Just a friendly reminder.
Okay, sure. I did talk to her over the phone, but I can
Oh, you
follow
did?
up. Yeah, I can just email you to just summarize.
Oh,
what you
well,
want.
if you spoke to her, then it's
Okay.
good. I didn't realize that.
Sure, no problem.
Thanks.
Of course.
All right.
Thank you. It's great. I'm excited.
All right, I do have a few quick update things. Any other business?
Just the legislative process.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I didn't even track that he was gonna come back. So I just, FYI, I sent out the draft legislative process. Vice President Larson had some initial input, but she has been working on it with Maddie in terms of the operational side. And I put together what I think is kind of reflective of where we've ended up, but also spoke with Director Hannah and he's gone through it, and this incorporates all of his whatever changes he wanted to see that he wasn't comfortable with in my initial draft. So this would be, I think this falls under, this is not a chapter 111 ordinance change. This is kind of the internal rules that Vice President Larson is working on the ethics side. So maybe my suggestion is we put these together the next time we talk about council rules and legislative process, and we can discuss it together and finalize it. Is that?
It's very helpful. Thank you. I think it's a good.
Yeah, I mean, this puts some meat on the bones of just the general, okay, you present committee of the whole, or now we're not doing committees, but, and then, that decides whether something moves on, but then what happens, right? So that's this part.
Just interestingly enough, on the thing about prior legislation history, I sent everyone an article from 2019 discussing when the city attempted to revise the last landmark legislation ordinance, and they dealt with this issue of owner's consent. And I'll let everyone read the article for themselves or go back and view the tape. And for anyone that's watching, it's from April 2019.
Interesting.
Heights Observer, their articles are available online from their website.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so we're just moving that along.
Yeah, I mean,
so we'll
it's a one pager and so is the other one, so this is good that we have, kind of simple and we have agreement. That's, always the good part of the law department. Anything else? Anybody?
I have one thing just
Yeah,
to
please.
announce quickly. This is just a kind of a heads up. Mayor Pedras asked me several months ago to work with Legal Aid Society that was interested in doing some public presentations about tenants' rights, particularly about the rent escrow process. So plan is developed and we will be doing three in-person and one virtual presentations in both the Coventry and the Noble neighborhood using a whole bunch of partners. I can tell you who they are, about advocating for your home condition, lead safety, how to make a housing complaint to the city. And there is discussion in the courts about improving the process by which rent escrow is applied for, possibly making an online process. And there may be then an online webinar and discussion about that if that comes to pass. So I just want to let you know that's happening. The first one is on September 16th at the Family Resource Center. And when we come back, I'll have more flyers and all that.
So just an update on the application and
Oh, sure.
President Kudo and I have been working on the application for when council has a vacancy. And we've also been working on the job description that Sarah got started, and we are probably gonna present it in August in committee of the whole.
Probably the 24th, yeah. All right, anybody else? Okay, so, Gail and I had two community meetings, one in Noble Library, one at Lee Road Library. We had 15 people at the Noble, maybe 30, so at the Lee Road Library. People brought up Shaker Lakes. I mean, that ended up being pretty lively, as you can imagine. Some people actually wanted to know about resident committees. Collaboration with East Cleveland. It was so great to be able to talk about our mayor's relationship with the new East Cleveland mayor. Police presence, crosswalk issues, safety, and that kind of thing. Blanche extension. I sent, of course, one of the things we do is we send everything to the administration. It's really good to have somebody there. This is just a suggestion to take notes, because, you seem to be able to do that and pay attention. I can't do that. So we had an intern doing that, and it was very helpful.
Can I
So,
ask a question about
Yeah,
that?
sure.
Because actually Councilman Posh and I are very soon to finalize a date for the last week of August, August 25th or 27th. We're working on that. Is this something, can we either borrow your
Yeah,
intern
sure.
or can Addie come or what, how can we?
you could ask Addie, but I mean, you're certainly welcome to ask Kristen,
Okay.
she's delightful, just.
She was great at the
And
Noble
she's
one that I
your
went to.
intern?
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and if you're interested in getting an intern, Elizabeth Kirby has this thing she calls the superintendent's cadre, and it will start to meet. It probably won't meet till September, even though I think they're back, at some point in August. When does your husband go back?
August 14th or
Yeah,
something.
well,
yes,
okay. But, and she's always welcomed us to attend and talk to students who might be interested in interning. Not that that's the only place you can get an intern, but we actually have an ordinance that allows us to do this.
Can you share with us how many people attended?
Yeah, it's I think 15 for the library, Noble, and about 30 for the Lee Road Library. And have it, I mean, if you think another place would be better, or more
places,
but just, knock that around. Addie probably has some ideas on that. If any of you have anything that you think Addie might, be able to help you on, especially the next 5 weeks, just because she'll have somewhat less work to do, just not having to prepare legislation. But
Quick question on that, can we just approach her directly
of
or?
course, always.
Okay.
No, always approach her directly. There's no gatekeeper on her. She's our collective clerk of council. I just wanted to let you know that I did ask the planning department to reach out to the owner of the Alcazar to see if there was any leeway on my pet thing about the rent, and they were very willing to do that. I'm only saying this to you, I have no idea what's gonna happen, but if the terms are changed, I didn't want you to be surprised. Yeah.
And I would support what you talked about, because if it's 5 or 6 legacy people in there,
Yeah, it's not.
it's an insignificant amount of money
Yeah.
versus the significant tax break that he is getting. So I really think that he needs to come back with the number.
Well, it would be nice, but I think we're all very supportive of the project. I mean, it's gonna be a great improvement. I would strongly suggest you can go in there. It's already underway, and there's a lot of great things going on. And the courtyard is just gorgeous.
You could just go in.
I feel
Just,
I feel bad that I just blurted that out. but
anybody.
It was open, and the area that you walk into is a common area. It's not like you're
Right.
walking into someone's apartment.
Common, not necessarily public.
I have a few more modifications that I'd like to propose to section 111, and I was wondering, should I just go to the law department and do it, or do you want to discuss it? I mean, I don't want to discuss it now, but
Why don't you, my suggestion would be.
yeah, please.
Share them with the law department and just have the law department mark them separately, because they're gonna have to come back.
Oh, absolutely separate, but
No, but just so we know, like.
these
presumably
are,
won't remember.
I'm late, so I don't expect anything necessarily to be adopted, but I just wanted to put them.
Would it be possible to send those to Addie to share with us just as a highlight, like this is what's being sent?
I mean, I'll ask the law director, I'm pretty sure we can do that.
Or
If we just don't comment on it.
Right, right.
or if it's just a, FYI.
I mean,
Not for
we always do
comment.
the abundance of
Right.
caution thing, so, but that's what I would wanna do, is just share it and then.
And then we'd have an opportunity to discuss it before it necessarily gets.
Right, instead of like,
Because that's gonna be a.
here's what we all
after
discussed,
recess.
and then there's these few extra things,
Yeah.
and then we have to kind of, yeah. All right, anything else? All right, this meeting is adjourned exactly at 8 o'clock.
Great time.